hearts, minds, and souls with insights that pertained to the importance of strengthening the will to protect biodiversity. We were given examples of financing solutions that have worked. And then that discussion continued with insights that allowed us to have a deeper appreciation of nature and what it means to our very survival. I'm pleased to say that those insights will be further buttressed by more important discussions that we have in the lineup for this afternoon today. And we will kick things off talking about data and how critical it is to our decision making in this entire conversation. To lead this afternoon's panel on this very important topic of data to decisions technologies for biodiversity impact tracking is head of the Environmental Protection Agency, Mr. Kemraj Parsaram. Mr. Parsaram, over to you.
Thank you, and good afternoon. You hear me? Testing. Good. Great. Good afternoon, and it's very, not easy to be the first session after lunch. Your belly's filled. I think we have an exciting 45 minutes. Rest assured, only 45 minutes. And what we're talking about today, this afternoon, is data, biodiversity science, and how can we track biodiversity utilizing the various technologies available, and then converting that into decisions and for informing policy and informing regulatory actions and ensuring that we achieve the goals we want for biodiversity and the environment in general. And so I'm doing it a bit different. Rather than sitting on those 5 or 4 nice comfy chairs, we will be sitting right here, and let me take the opportunity to introduce the very esteemed panelists here. They're high-powered, high-ranking, and we're a bit gender balanced as well, as you can see, or maybe not. Because it's him alone, and there's 2 beautiful ladies to my left here. But let me introduce them. First, I have, whoops, where did that go? Right, I'll start with the male first. Dr. Sudhakar Reddy, who is a scientist, engineer with the Indian Space Research Organization, ISRO, and we have a delegation from India here we are privileged to have. Dr. Reddy leads the Forest Biodiversity and Ecology Division at India's National Remote Sensing Center. He's ranked among the world's top 2% scientists. He has pioneered the use of remote sensing to assess forest fragmentation, biodiversity hotspots, and ecological change across India. And then to the beautiful ladies to my left, starting with Dr. Leslie D'Souza, who is no stranger to Guyana. She's a senior conservation ecologist at the Chicago Field Museum, and she's a renowned ichthyologist and conservation ecologist who has worked across the globe in the region and in Guyana, and especially in the Amazon basin. And importantly, she has applied environmental DNA, or what we call eDNA, and incorporating indigenous knowledge and participation in science and assessing freshwater biodiversity, and also serves as a science communicator with outreach via the National Geographic and the E.O. Wilson Foundation. And then last but not least is Dr. Claire Hoffman, who I had the privilege of meeting for the very first time. She is head of partnerships at Yale Center for Biodiversity and Global Change. Dr. Hoffman bridges research and decision-making. She advises on aligning conservation data with policies and campaigns, and has worked with governments, corporations, and storytellers to embed biodiversity in regulatory, in law, in strategies, and all sorts of narratives for biodiversity. So give them a round of applause, please. But before I invite them to speak, I want to give you a brief about 2 minutes on what the EPA and Guyana has done as it relates to satellite technology for tracking environmental change. And there should be a video, a brief video should be showing right now. Is it on? Is it ready? But 2 years ago, the EPA, we had this expansive country to deal with. And particularly in 2017 with the advent of oil and gas. And as you know, production is offshore, about 190 km offshore. And we are here in the city. How do we keep an eye on what's happening offshore? And so we got into a partnership with Maxar Technologies. And Maxar Technologies is one of the most prominent satellite service provider globally. And what they have done is that we're able to sit in our office or in our homes and get an alert if there's an oil spill. And if there is, we can immediately task the satellite, meaning we can call upon it and send it directly over the FPSO to assess if there's what's the extent of the spill and what are the damages that may possibly be caused. We're also using it and looking to, in terms of the mining activities, assess how our rivers to detect the levels of turbidity by utilizing satellite imagery as well. So we're on the ground taking water samples, collecting data, and at the same time correlating it with Sentinel satellite imagery. Am I correct, Johan? Sentinel imagery. And what we hope to achieve is that by correlating those, we can able to see whether we can look at the satellite imagery and say, hey, this area or this particular river is polluted, and to take action accordingly. We also have a network of water quality sensors, remote sensors. I can pull out my phone right now and I can tell you what's the water quality at Bartica in the upper Essequibo, middle Essequibo, sorry, and at Saxacali. And if you go to our booth, you'll see a video that outlines all of that. That's what we're doing. I just want to set that stage. So we have all this data coming, but how do we convert that into real decision-making and policy guidance? And today, these three esteemed panelists will explain that. I'll call on Dr. Reddy for his presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. Respected Mr. Kemaraj, moderator, distinguished delegates, and dear colleagues. First, I would like to thank the organizers of Global Biodiversity Alliance Summit, as well as the Government of India for this valuable opportunity. In this presentation, I am showing some of the major achievements which were carried out at Indian Space Research Organization. As the time is limited, I will be touching only on some of the major applications which are being used by the different ministries in the Government of India. So you know that the biodiversity is a multidimensional, multidisciplinary, and cross-disciplinary science or subject. So here we need to integrate the knowledge from the various disciplines like the taxonomy, ecology, geoinformatics, and the other allied technologies. So once we want to assess the biodiversity, we have the various levels like the species level, community, ecosystem, landscape. It is a hierarchy concept. Again, we have a different kind of approach also with the name of essential biodiversity variables. So this very novel approach identifies the 6 classes of essential biodiversity variables, and the GeoBon recommends that the remote sensing is one of the state-of-art technology can be utilized in addressing the majority of the essential biodiversity variables. So the framework, there are several frameworks are available. So I have gone through the several publications as also the CBD and other international organizations databases and the activities. I found that the majority of the organizations and also towards the policy and management, they are addressing the information related to species richness and diversity. So here the primary data is coming through the field observations, in situ measurements, and sampling approaches. Then the remote sensing has its capability to understand the information like at a tree level to the landscape level. So you can able to understand the various features in a spatio-temporal domain, ecosystem function. It is also one of the important attribute of the biodiversity. So we need to understand the influence of the structure and function and composition, as well as the functional processes or how they are affecting the taxonomic diversity. Again, they at the same time as the loss of biodiversity is identified as one of the triple planetary crises. So in this regard, the high temporal remote sensing data, like even Indian remote sensing satellite data sets, Landsat series, Sentinel series of satellites are providing the very good amount of information at various resolutions. So we can able to map and assess the habitat loss and the improvement of vegetation, invasion of the alien species, fire disturbances, and many other threats on the ground level to the landscape level. As recently, there are several indices are available earlier to quantify the biodiversity, like the Shannon-Weir index, Simpson index, but they are generally works at the plot scale. So to have a better understanding at the ecosystem level, landscape, regional, national, and global, the GeoBan recommended the next generation of biodiversity indicators by having the information on the species habitat indices, biodiversity habitat, intactness, and the other relevant next generation of indicators. And finally, this decade has identified for the ecological restoration. So in this theme also, by utilizing the ecological principles of the vulnerability, irreplaceability, ecological representativeness, the remote sensing as well as GIS are helpful in addressing these issues of conservation planning and the management. This is one of the unique data set we have prepared for the South Asian region. We used multi-source remote sensing data sets and also topographical maps, ground truth data to map the forest cover. And from 1988 onwards, we have our own Indian remote sensing program. So from 1988 later, we have used the Indian remote sensing series of satellites in mapping of the India's forest cover. And one of the major input required for assessing the biodiversity is the information on the spatial information on the distribution of the forest types. India is a mega biodiversity country, and if you see these forest types, we have like the tropical, subtropical, temperate, and alpine forest types. So because of this wide variability in climate as well as in topography, there are different kinds of flora and fauna. And by using the optical remote sensing data sets, spectral information, phenological information, microwave remote sensing data related to structure, and the other sensors data, we can able to map the different forest types. So this is one of the first outcome using the medium resolution Indian remote sensing data. And here, again, to have the scalable approach, like the climatic classification, phenological classification, biogeographic, as well as the distinct formations. So we use the multi-source data, and this is one of the map shows the national legend of Indian forest types. And again, to translate at the international scale, and we have used the land cover classification scheme suggested by FAO. So there is a clear translation between the classes identified at the national scale, so we can incorporate into the global classification legends. The another important milestone activity is that the mapping of the different vegetation types. So here our interest is on the biodiversity prioritization. So we initially mapped the forest types like the mixed forest type, single species dominated, and local specific formations. And here, whatever the map we prepared is having like the hybrid classification approaches, but the primary input is coming from the field survey and sample plot data provided by the various collaborating organizations, state forest departments, academia, and the scientific institutions. So using the forest cover as an input, we could able to quantify the fragmentation index. So here we use the open source geospatial tools to know the fragmentation status of the different vegetation types. And another one is the disturbance regimes. So here we utilize the one specific model called spatial landscape analysis model. It is actually a multi-criteria decision model. It will use the various remote sensing based data sources as well as like the proximity to disturbance sources like settlement, road, fire locations. And by using these multiple variables, we could able to generate the map of the disturbance index for the entire country. The final outcome of the landscape level biodiversity characterization study is that here we integrated the field information as well as the remote sensing based information to generate the landscape level biological richness map of India. And this data we have shared with all the state stakeholders like the state forest departments, National Biodiversity Authority, and the state biodiversity boards. One more activity we have initiated on R&D basis is identifying the biologically significant areas. So here we attempted to utilize the criteria descriptions given by the conventional biological diversity and other peer-reviewed literature. And here also we integrated the information from the multiple data sources, and it is not only from the Indian remote sensing data set, and also the important variables required in quantifying the information. As the technology is advancing so rapidly, now we have the medium resolution to high resolution data sets, and also we have the artificial intelligence and machine learning approaches. So here we have used the data fusion approaches by combining the optical data as well as microwave data. Then using the machine learning tools like random forest, we could able to generate the tree community maps for the selected regional landscapes. As at the local scale, we need more detailed information. So using the morphological spatial pattern analysis, we could able to identify the ecological corridors in a given regional landscape, as well as the forest ecosystems which are under the edge influence. Then we have also generated the maps of the alpha diversity and beta diversity. Here, in the earlier case, in the biological richness study at landscape level, there it was based on the multi-criteria decision model. Here, it is based on the spectral variation hypothesis. So by using the field in situ measurement data and then correlating with the spectral values in the different dates and also the hyperspectral remote sensing data, we are now generating the alpha diversity maps for the given regional landscapes. Another important activity is that in the earlier cases, we are going for like a discrete land cover classification or vegetation type information. As large amount of data is available in open access domain, both from like Landsat as well as from the Indian remote sensing data satellites. And in the last 10 years, we are also having the access to the Sentinel series of satellites. So now we can able to use that information and identify the patterns in the greenness. So that will help us in identifying the areas of high productivity and also the areas of positive or negative change, so that it can be useful as one of the early warning indicator in improving the resources. And once you are coming to the species level, we could not able to map all the species. You are aware that the remote sensing has the capability to map only the canopy dominating species or species which are growing sufficiently in open spaces. So in case of like many of the medicinal plants, herbaceous plants, we need to depend on the habitat suitability models or species distribution models. So here we are trying to generate the information on the potential niche by using the climatic variables and also the realized niche by using the both biotic variables and abiotic variables with the finer resolutions. So this is the database we prepared for the country, the distribution of the endemic animal species and endemic plant species. So this will become the prime input in understanding the habitat condition of those species. Then the important threat is coming through the biological innovation. So we have a good number of predatory network system in India. Similarly, the global scale, we have the major threat due to the invasive species. We also have the threat in the country due to the invasive species like the Prosopis juliflora lantana camera, chromolina odorata. There are many numbers such. So by using this, the Landsat series of satellites, Sentinel series of satellites, Indian remote sensing series of satellites, and by incorporating the information from the field survey, we can able to know the distribution of the different vegetation invasive species. So finally, here I would like to conclude that once you want to have the national biodiversity information, so it is a collaborative effort. The information will not only come from the geoinformatics or the ecologist. So all the policy makers as well as the resource managers, then the scientists, they have to identify the important frameworks, and also we need to identify the gaps in the survey, gaps in protected area network, and also we have to address the various kinds of the biodiversity indicators, and also we need to generate the scenarios using the modeling techniques. And like that, we need to have the information like the species profile level to the landscape. So that will give the important prime input for the biodiversity as well as bioresource management at the landscape scale to the local scale. And here I would like to conclude with this thank you slide, that I appreciate the efforts of the government of Guyana. So as a role model, they have a large scale or massive afforestation exercise near our Georgetown coast. So if you see this, the annual data sets from the Sentinel series, it clearly shows that there is a clear increasing trend of the mangrove cover towards the ocean. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Dr. Reddy, and that was quite impressive. And I actually have a question for you, but I'll hold it for the end. But it's amazing how you've brought all of that data and that information into this national bioinformatics database. And so it'll be interesting to hear a bit more about that. But let me invite Dr. Leslie to make our presentation.
Sorry. Good afternoon, everyone. It's so wonderful to be here. It's such an honor to be at this inaugural Global Biodiversity Alliance Summit. I see so many familiar faces in here, so thank you for making me feel welcome and at home in Guyana. Can you all hear me? We need to get some interaction here from the... So I'm going to talk a little bit about, I think the slides will go up shortly. I want to talk a little bit about work that is boots on the ground, the kind of work where you walk through the forest and you're swimming in the rivers, relying on local experts to validate these models and the tools that you hear about in this session. Rapid inventories have long been a way to get a snapshot of time in a landscape and to quickly assess its conservation value. I think the slides are coming up. Or I can just keep talking. We can do stretches after lunch. I'll wait a few seconds. I won't tell you a joke, but I'll try to think of one in case it's a little bit longer. I think one of the, so maybe improv. I'm from Chicago, so we do comedy in Chicago. I don't think I should quit what I'm doing to do comedy. So I think maybe what I'll do is I can reference to Dr. Reddy's talk, because I think I see a huge opportunity in collaboration with the type of work that we do. Okay, wonderful. All right. So I want to talk a little bit about boots on the ground work that we do, walking in the forest, swimming the rivers, relying on local experts to validate these models and tools that we'll be talking about today. And we know that rapid inventories has long been a way to get a snapshot in time of the conservation value in a landscape. We are a natural history museum. We've cataloged life on Earth. That's the history of these museums. These are specimens and artifacts that were collected in Guyana over 100 years ago. But we also are looking to how can natural history museums contribute to action on the ground and support governments for biodiversity action and protection of biodiversity as well as the livelihoods of people. And we do this through the Keller Science Action Center, where our flagship program is the Rapid Inventories program. And this, if you see in the map, these are the areas where we have completed rapid inventories. These are primarily in the upper Amazon, and we finally have a polygon in Guyana, which I'll talk about shortly. And these are rapid inventories that are built with governments, communities, NGOs, academic institutions, landowners, to deploy our team in order to assess these landscapes. These rapid inventories are social and biological. This is an example of how the biological and social information together provide insights for conservation planning and decision making. These maps are from a rapid inventory in the northernmost area of Peru. On the left, you have a map that the biological team made of the ecosystems that they visited and inventoried. And on the right is a map that was assessed by the social team. And this shows kind of how the local communities were using the lands, the priorities for this landscape. And so based on this work, the government created 3 different protected areas. One that was a strict protected area, and the other 2 were co-managed with the indigenous communities. We've also worked with the government of Peru in the Loreto region, which is a province in the northeastern corner. It's in the upper Amazon region. It's about twice the size of Guyana, to help expand their protected area system. And so this is in 2000 when we began working with them. And they only had about 8% coverage of their lands in protected areas. And then by 2025 now, they have about 25%. And this is various categories of protected areas, and this is kind of a good example of how to incorporate the biodiversity and the social data to create different and diverse types of conservation areas in this landscape. So over 25 years, we have done 33 rapid inventories, supported the creation of 20 new conservation areas. This is over 41 million acres and about 300 or more community members engaged. Oop, oop, oh goodness, you guys are seeing it all. Okay. Sensitive. And we're improving, these rapid inventories are improving, and we're doing things quicker, and we need these tools to do things quicker because we're in a crisis, as you've been hearing in the last 1.5 days, and it's not changing. And so we need tools to help us to assess biodiversity quicker, in addition to the work on the ground by the local communities. And so environmental DNA, this is where you can collect a cup of water, assess the genetic material, and know what biodiversity has been there in 24 to 48 hours. Artificial intelligence for assessing the forest cover or even arboreal species and identifying them. Camera traps for long-term monitoring, and even acoustics to identify species in the soundscape. These are all tools. Oh, goodness. Sorry, guys. But we know that one of the most powerful tools are in the forest and in the rivers that we work in. And that's the local ecological knowledge. And that is why it's such an important part of our work to incorporate communities in these rapid inventories. I want to take you to the forest really quick before I move to that slide. So we were invited by the government of Guyana to work with the Protected Areas Commission, EPA. We worked with other NGOs, CI, Frankfurt Zoological Society, University of Guyana, and 3 communities to do a rapid inventory in the southeastern portion of Guyana. This is an area that is poorly known. Very few scientific expeditions had ever been to this area, and for a scientist that's a dream, to go to a place that is barely known, and that would be kind of a new adventure for discovering scientific assets of this area. Very few have stepped into these areas or traversed these rivers, but there were people on the ground that know this place intimately. So there are 3 communities that are surrounding this Acarai quarantine corridor, and it's the Acarai Mountains in the southwest on the border with Brazil, to the Quarantine River in Suriname. This is an expanse of about 1.5 million hectares. 4 of Guyana's largest rivers, the headwaters, are within this corridor. And it's surrounded, like I said, by Mas Canary, Parabara, and Cashew Island. So in preparation for the field work, we did a flyover of this area. We went with Protected Areas Commission, CI, FCS, and leaders of the communities that surround this area. And the forest, I didn't know there was volume, but there was volume, but this area stretched from horizon to horizon. It was expansive. It was just a sea of lush green forests, uninterrupted, I'm so sorry, uninterrupted rock outcrops. It was magnificent. And for someone who's worked in the Amazon basin in remote areas for 20 years, I didn't grasp intact forests until this moment as we flew over this Acarai quarantine corridor. It's a breathtaking landscape. And it was also very big. How do you assess the biodiversity in this area in a place that's 1.5 million hectares? So it's critical to compose a team that included local experts, national experts. Also, we had young participants from the EPA and the Protected Areas Commission who had never been into the field before, and rely on this local knowledge in order to build a rapid inventory that would be able to extrapolate this large expanse. We had a team that was predominantly Guyanese, and it was really magnificent to work with primarily Guyanese people on this expedition. They helped us to design where to put the camps in order to assess this biodiversity. So we were able to hit highlands, lowland areas. In the middle of this corridor is a huge plateau. We were able to traverse from the New River to the Essequibo River during the expedition and learn from the local ecological knowledge of the communities about ecological processes, about understanding aspects of biodiversity from their perspective, as well as methods for collecting biodiversity. So our team set nets to catch fish for 21 days. We collected plants, we made bird lists, we searched for reptiles and amphibians, reviewed camera traps, mist-netted for bats, and as I said, we learned from the local experts about their perspectives and their knowledge about this landscape. We also were able to learn the deep history. There's a deep history of indigenous peoples that have moved through this area, and there were petroglyphs that had never been documented before and were found in this area. So a history of a lot of movement across the corridor. So just to give you kind of some of the highlights, we have a booth here with an infographic and some materials from this rapid inventory. We launched the rapid inventory report today, so I hope you'll come by and check it out. But just to give you some of the astonishing numbers in 3 weeks in the field, 10 million emergent trees, giant trees, think of the biggest tree you've ever seen across this landscape. That's just astounding to think about how many large trees are in this area that support this tremendous biodiversity. 50% of the birds in Guyana were found within this corridor. There was a new record of a bird in Guyana, but unfortunately I forgot the name. Is Brian O'Shea in here? He could tell us. The reptiles and amphibians, there were 2 new species to science that were found. And one interesting aspect of this survey from the herpetologist perspective is that these biomes, this area is actually at a crossroads of several different biomes. So you have the Amazonian and the Eastern Guyana Shield, and then this Northern Guyana Shield region, and this was right at the center. The water, we worked with a geologist who has been working in the Amazon basin for about 40 years, and he said this was the purest water that he'd ever measured in all of his work. And so this is astounding in the headwaters of the Essequibo and in the New River Basin. Fishes, which is my love, and my area on the expedition was studying the fishes of this area. 33 new species to science. I'm going to say it again. 33 new species to science. All known, most of them known locally, and 40 new records for Guyana. So because this area had been poorly explored and was new to scientific research, that we were able to add 40 new records of fishes to the fish list of Guyana. This stingray might be a new species as well, so maybe it's 34. One of the biggest highlights for me on this trip was working closely with before I go to that story, I do want to mention, I've never seen piranhas as big as I saw in this area. I've never seen wolffish as big as I've seen in this area, Aymara. Catfish, I don't know, they're just so fat. It's just amazing. This area is very rich. They're doing very well and they're very healthy. And I'd never seen fish this big in my life. 8 of the primates in Guyana were all found here in this corridor. We think 400 jaguars is estimated to be in this corridor. 400. This is a very important place for mammals, and these jaguars are just prowling. We had 2 encounters in the field. And the highlight for me was working with the local experts on collecting the fishes that we collected. They worked with all of the teams. But this is a photo of Uncle Mark, who we utilized the poison vine to collect fishes as a method to assess some of the small streams. It's not something that they use very often to collect fish, but it was a way that they wanted us to learn this method. And several of the new species to science came from that method. I was almost up for time. Okay, sorry. I'm moving on. And then also the fish traps that were made by the local people. eDNA detected 100 species that were not detected by conventional methods. So this was a complement to the work that we did on the ground. And the thing that's unique about the rapid inventories is that we do a synthesis at the end. We go to the field for 3 weeks. Everybody stays together for a week. We did it here in Georgetown, and we assess, we synthesize the information, but not just biodiversity data, because that's not all you need for decision making. And so we looked at strengths, the threats, opportunities, and we make recommendations together. And this group is not just the field team, it also incorporated people from the University of Guyana, from all other government agencies, people that have experience in thinking about conservation planning for Guyana. This is the moment. This is the biodiversity data that we're talking about here at the summit. This is the forests that support the biodiversity here. This is a huge opportunity. This data was compiled with lead agencies from the government to local people. And this is a moment for Guyana to support conservation in this area, in this landscape that the people in the surrounding neighboring communities depend on. This is also the data that feed into the dashboard models for that you'll hear about from Map of Life, that feed AI software, that feed into environmental DNA reference databases, that feed into the soundscape for acoustics. And so boots on the ground biodiversity data informs these other tools that help extend a scientist. And so we need to kind of continue to rely on data that we're getting from the ground, from the field, from local experts, as well as complementing that with these amazing tools that we're building. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Leslie. That was quite impressive. And you will understand why when I said that Guyana is definitely a living museum of evolutionary history. And that right there proves it. And the fact that we are still intact and our ecosystems functioning at scale. That's proof again right there. I will pass you on over to Dr. Hoffman from, no, here you go.
All right. I have been instructed to turn this one on. Is that better? Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us after lunch. I have to say I'm blown away by the number of you who actually made it to this session after lunch. And I haven't actually seen anybody catching the post-lunch sleepies yet. Everybody seems to be awake, so I'm very impressed by that. And thank you for being here with us. As Kamraj said, my name is Claire Hoffman, and I am the head of partnerships for the Yale Center for Biodiversity and Global Change. Oh, I'm hoping my slides will be up here in just a second as well. In the meantime, while we're waiting for the slides to come up, I'll start off with a little bit of a brief overview of our center and the key steps in our research and development history that have led us to the point of being here with you all today at this summit. Our center was founded nearly 15 years ago to study the world's biodiversity, particularly through a spatial and modeling lens. I am going to skip over most of those details today because you've already heard a lot of that from Dr. Reddy. There's a lot of overlap in the types of information that we integrate and the types of modeling approaches that we take. So the theme of this session is from data to decisions, and I'm going to take us a little bit further into the decisions side of things. So over the last 15 years, we have worked with a range of key partners on these initiatives, including Esri, Google, the Field Museum's a close partner of ours, and the E.O. Wilson Biodiversity Foundation, to name just a few. Our collaborations in these efforts have led to us to develop a wealth of global species data information and a suite of tools to help support the conservation of those species. Our center is also home to the Map of Life, which is an initiative under the auspices of the Group on Earth Observations, or GEO, and GeoBon, as Dr. Reddy also mentioned, to assemble and integrate a wide range of knowledge about species distributions and their dynamics, their changes over time. Over the last couple of years, we have also had some really exciting developments that have led us deeper into the world of biodiversity monitoring and sensor technologies. One of these is the X Prize Rainforest competition, which some of you may be familiar with. We competed in this competition along with the Field Museum and a suite of other partners to develop innovative modeling technologies and monitoring technologies to assess biodiversity remotely around the world. And we end up, perfect. Let me skip ahead here. Here we go. We were one of the winners of this competition, which then jump-started our establishment of an additional Map of Life tool, Map of Life Pro, and an entire team called the Map of Life Solutions team to spearhead this initiative. We have also been working with the government of Guyana for the last 8 or 9 months now to try to integrate some of this data and start to develop innovative tools and solutions to take all of this long history of species development and apply it on the ground here in Guyana. So from the beginning, the focus in our center has been species data, but very specifically, we focus on species data in a structure that can be integrated with a range of other data types that are really important for conservation and decision making. We pull our data from a wide range of data sources, public databases covering everything from GBA occurrence records to satellite data and everything in between, trait species databases, everything like that. We clean, process, and harmonize all of these disparate data sources to get to the point where we can develop an understanding of what species exist where and when. This is that species data cube that Dr. Reddy has already beat me to the punch on. We then replicate this data cube to cover every pixel on Earth to provide a globally standardized species models that we can apply to support decision making around the world. Oh, it is very sensitive. Okay. There we go. All right. We use these globally standardized data to, it sounds like my microphone stopped working. Can you guys still hear me? Okay, perfect. We use these globally standardized data to calculate and maintain a range of metrics and indicators, including 3 indicators that are adopted under the Global Biodiversity Framework. The first is the Species Protection Index, which is a component indicator for Target 3 for 30 by 30. The second is the Species Habitat Index, which is a component for Goal A of the Global Biodiversity Framework, and the Species Information Index, which is a component indicator for Target 21. We also have a suite of indicators that are aligned with emerging standards and frameworks for finance mechanisms and corporate reporting, including TNFD and a whole suite of others. I'm going to skip ahead now to the decision side of things. So we take all of this data and we integrate it, and then we help to create tools to apply these data sources and these metrics and indicators to support on-the-ground reporting, monitoring, and decision-making. We have spent the last 3 days driving around all around Georgetown and having conversations with a suite of partners here, including government agencies and NGOs, and also the last 8 months all combined, having lots of Zoom meetings and starting to figure out who is working in this space here, what kind of information do they have, and to figure out where some of the remaining gaps might be. We've been really amazed by the collaborative atmosphere here in Guyana. It has really blown us away how deeply integrated all of these teams are, not only in terms of personnel and collaboration on the surface, but also the data. There's a lot of intersection, a lot of overlap, in a way that it makes it very, very powerful. What hasn't yet been integrated, however, is the data structure itself. The knowledge that each group holds about their respective areas of expertise, their study locations, their study species, these have not yet been integrated purely from a logistical standpoint. They've all spoken to us about the value of this integration, but the limitation comes from individual systems and structures that each organization uses. This is not surprising. We see this all around the world. Each organization develops their own data structures, and while they might be collaborating with partners on those, the data structures don't necessarily talk to each other. So, as you might have anticipated, this is where we come in. This data integration and the convening infrastructure is exactly what the government of Guyana has asked us to begin developing and what I'm going to talk to you all about today. So this data structure, this tool, is called the National Biodiversity Information System, or NBIS. This is an initial prototype that I'm going to be showing you today. It's developed to the stage where we could take it to all the partners in Guyana and start to bring a functional tool to them to allow them to experience what this functionality might look like, what this data system is capable of, but then jumpstart conversations about what more can we do with it? What are the data types that they hold in-house? What are the use cases that interest the applications of this data system so that we can start to build from here, right? We've done a lot of development in the background just to get us to a starting point, and that's where we're at today. So I want to bring your mind back to that species data model that I was talking about a few slides back. Which species occur where and when. For each species in our system, we have all of the publicly available data for that species displayed on the dashboard, including occurrence records and species ranges. We then combine all of this data with satellites, and we create a habitat refined range for each of these species, where we think these species are likely to exist based off of what is actually happening on the ground. What do these landscapes look like? We can then overlay these ranges with locations of existing protected areas or other administrative areas of interest, including the regions here in Guyana, along with a suite of others. I want to pause here for a second and draw your attention to two things on this image. The overlap of the protected areas with the species ranges, as well as the change in that range over time. You might not be able to see it super clearly because the screens are small, but that blue species range has a little bit of yellow in it and a little bit of red in it. We track the change in that landscape, that habitat over time, with red indicating loss in habitat for that species and yellow indicating gain for that species. I'll come back to that in a second. We use the former, the overlap of the protected areas with those ranges, to calculate the species protection score for each species. This is a metric of how well existing protected areas actually cover the range of those species. Then we use the second, the change in that habitat over time, to calculate the species habitat score, how the area and connectivity of that habitat has changed over time. Both of these are the indicators that are adopted under the Global Biodiversity framework, and we can track these for any given species, particularly within Guyana, both for the range within the country of Guyana and additional countries that range extends into. This example, you can see crosses borders, which is very common for species. We want to be able to track how that species is doing within the country of Guyana, as well as neighbors or anywhere else in that species range. And then we also calculate this value at a global scale as well. We also have what we call the regions page on our dashboard, where you can take a step back from the individual species and start looking at landscape scale patterns. We can ingest administrative layers like protected areas, regional boundaries, areas of conservation interest. The Field Museum's rapid inventory data is in this system already. You can also draw your own area of interest on this map, or you could upload a shapefile. For any of these options, our system calculates an expected species list based off of all of the species data that we have ingested into our system. Which species do we actually expect to be present in that area? What types of data do we have for them? And also, what are their current conservation threat statuses? So we can filter this data by their IUCN Red List category, whether we actually have occurrence records for them, whether they showed up in the rapid inventory data. And then you can click on any of those species lists, any of the species in that list, and it'll take you back to the broader species data page. So we're linking all of these aggregate metrics to the species to really inform decision-making on the ground. We need to be able to track patterns at the protected area level or at the national or regional level. We also need to know what the individual species are doing to help inform management plans, impact tracking, things like that. On the regions page, we also have additional data layers to overlay with these areas of interest. These include the indigenous territories in Guyana, as well as richness and rarity layers for a range of species groups. Currently, we have these for all of the terrestrial vertebrates in Guyana, as well as a couple of other key species groups like butterflies, damselflies, things like that. We are working to update our taxonomic coverage for this to include a lot of freshwater species, particularly a request of Dr. Leslie. And the important thing here is that we can ingest a lot of other types of data. Again, this is our starting point. This is the data that we had in our hands when we started the development of this tool. But we know that there are a lot of other types of data that are important to make decisions, whether those be infrastructure, development plans, concessions, socioeconomic layers, community, territories. All of these things can be ingested into this system so you can look at them all at once, develop a really comprehensive and holistic understanding of all of the pieces that go into making decisions for conservation. The final page that I want to show you very quickly is the trends page. This is where we track trends in those indicators. The first is the Species Protection Index, which is that overlap of protected areas with species ranges. We can look at patterns in this indicator over time across different taxonomic groups, which you can see on those arced graphs halfway down, as well as some histograms at the bottom. We can compare the overall amount of protected area coverage to the Species Protection Index value to see how efficiently are protected areas covering species habitats. We can also look at the Species Habitat Index, which is the aggregation of all of the individual species habitat scores, how those species habitats are changing over time in area and connectivity. And we can do all of these at both the regional and the national level. The final one is the Species Information Index, which is a measure of how much data do we actually have on these species. How well distributed is that knowledge that we have of species to help both identify species that have a significant lack of recorded data on them, but also to identify locations where we have a significant lack of data. All of this information can help to inform future rapid inventories, monitoring programs on the ground, species of particular interest, things like that. So while we are incredibly excited about what we have built so far, the signing of our MOU with the government of Guyana yesterday is really just the starting gun for this initiative. From here, we're going to work very collaboratively with all of the agencies, all of the organizations, the community groups, the research institutions active in the country of Guyana to build out this ecosystem of knowledge. What information does each group have? What gaps have they identified? How can we build all of this together to really support deeper decision-making, impact tracking, engagement in emerging biodiversity finance mechanisms? All of that requires standardized, reliable, and depth of information. So we will be using this system as the backbone of a lot of these emerging initiatives. And we're going to continue to add in taxonomic groups from the modeling perspective, data types from different groups around Guyana, and really just the sky's the limit in terms of the applications of this tool for the government of Guyana, as well as the Global Biodiversity Alliance as a whole. We're very excited to speak with anybody who has interest in the data backbone, the infrastructure, the technical details here, as well as any potential partners who are interested in collaborating on this initiative, whether you're currently active in Guyana or you're interested in something similar similar across the broader Global Biodiversity Alliance. We've been incredibly honored the government of Guyana has entrusted us with this system, and we put a lot of effort into making sure that it can be a foundational pillar for all of these initiatives moving forward. That, I would like to say thank you very much for your attention, and I'll hand it back to Kendall.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hoffman, and that shows exactly, what we want to achieve here from this summit. It's partnership like this that we can actually have, bringing all this data together into this national biodiversity information system. And what we started out with ISRO would be very important, and see how we can merge all of that into this vision for a national observatory for biodiversity. And so I'm quite excited for all of this, and of course we'll have this conversation after this summit. I know I went over a bit, 45 minutes, Madam Chair, but spare me 5 minutes more, and I'll do something different and ask. I wouldn't say anything else. I'll ask from you if you have any questions for the panelists. So I'm going to open the floor for anyone who wish to ask any pointed question. Please, let's maximize in this 5 minutes that I've been granted. Just raise your hands and I'll recognize you. Okay, there is one right behind there. I see Miss Odessa Duncan. That's one of my staff.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, all. I just have a question regarding rapid assessment. So I saw a lot of fauna, but I really did not see any flora. You mentioned that there were huge trees, but you did not mention any particular species that really stood out. And so I was wondering if you captured any of those.
Can you hear me? Thank you for that question. And we do have the botanist who was on that rapid assessment here that can share all about the incredible flora that was found on the Ackroyd-Corentin corridor. So Dr. Nigel Pittman, if you could just raise your hand so that you can talk to Odessa. Yes, thank you.
Great.
Hi, Leslie, thanks for your fantastic work in Guyana over the decades. My question would be, some of these new species, are they going to be named after the indigenous experts?
Hi, Annette. Thank you for that question. So the very first species I described in Guyana was named Hypostomus macushi, after the Macushi people, because they said... It was actually a funny story because they were surprised that I was so excited. I was still learning about fishes, and they said, this is very common here. And they were eating the fish. And we were like, this is a new species. But 33, I don't even know how to begin to approach describing 33 new species. And so maybe we can have a fun event and naming all 33 and getting experts to describe them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leslie, for that wonderful slideshow. I was wondering whether or not it's available, or how can some of this material become more available than it is at the moment? Thanks.
Yes, so it's live now on our website, and so you can get a digital PDF, but there's also some copies here at the event. So I'll be happy to get a copy to you.
Great, thank you. I'll have the last question, and I want to direct it to ISRO. Oh, you have the question? Sure, go ahead.
Did your acoustics also recorded some illegal felling sounds? For her.
Oh, that is an incredible question. I think we haven't even, this is the first time that we've deployed the acoustics, and we're still going through the data, but I will make a note of that
and answer your question once we go through all the acoustics. So felling data, okay, we'll talk some more.
Great, yeah. So Dr. Reddy, how did you manage, or ISRO, manage to gather all of this data from various sources, of course? And India is huge in various organizations and so on. How did you manage to you didn't go out by yourself like Dr. Leslie with a team of locals and international experts. Could you shed some light briefly on that?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. It's a very interesting session where including pixels as well as molecules, along with the indicators, next generation of research. I'm very much thankful to everyone. The question is that, yeah, myself a botanist, and also we have a team of foresters like Dr. Girish Pujar and other colleagues, and also from the multiple disciplines from our department. But once you want to go for an exhaustive survey and intensive sampling, then that is not possible by us. Some ground truth we are doing. The remaining field sample data being collected by the ecologists, botanists, from the various scientific organizations and academia. So by collaborative efforts, we are collecting the data and generating the decision relevant products.
Much of the efforts were actually sponsored by some user ministries who were interested to understand how the genetic diversity or exploration potential exists. So there was a continuous funding for at least 10 years to pick up suitable academic institutions, funding them, sending them for rapid/slow inventories, then getting back the data.
Okay, thank you. One last question, and this is for Dr. Hoffman. So you've worked with a range of stakeholders, from policymakers to media. What would you say would be one top lesson in making complex biodiversity data compelling and actionable for non-scientists, for the layman? Go down.
Let's see. Can you all hear me? Okay. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that's the hardest question because you've asked me to say it in one line or in a very simple answer. And I would say the solution to making data compelling is translation. We have an expectation, typically across academic spaces, that other people will come to us and express interest in what we are doing, which not only implies interest, but also access and understanding that I think it is at some level inappropriate for us to assume from them. So instead, I think we have a responsibility to take our data, our information into other spaces and initiate the work of translating for them. And that doesn't necessarily mean that every scientist, every specialist has to also be fluent in policy or economics, but that we have a responsibility to convene networks of interpretation and collaboration where we can bring our information to and be collaborative in the translation of that. But the onus is on us to initiate those conversations.
Great. Thank you very much to my esteemed panelists. It was exciting. I'm sure you were all excited. And with this, I'll hand it over back to Madam Chair. Thank you very much.
That was certainly one of the leading panels. We've learned so much about Guyana, and I want to thank the panelists for sharing so much with us, especially given the time constraints. So thank you once again. We'll now continue the discussion with the second panel for the second half of the day, and this will be led by President Duque, once again, who's also one of our favorites here. And his discussion will be centered on strengthening alliance for the 30 by 30 biodiversity goal. And I'll now hand it over to our esteemed moderator to introduce his panelists, and to take us through the theme that we are about to explore this afternoon. I also wish to note that in the interest of time, this panel will be given 35 minutes.
panel, which I think is going to be one of the interesting conversations about 30 by 30, how to define the right instruments, how to protect nature, and how to do it in consonance with market-driven, nature-based solutions. I am glad to have here with us Senator Rothfengel. Senator, great to have you in this panel. You've been a great champion in the global campaign for nature, and a voice that has multiple insights from obviously the political landscape, but also in the nature diplomacy around the world. I have to also welcome Gabriel Quijandría, former Minister of Environment of Peru. I had the privilege in my previous life to work with his father, someone who I had great respect and who I will always remember for his environmental commitments. Great to have you here, Gabriel. And I also have in this panel Karthik Ramana. Karthik Ramana is a professor of the Blavagny School of Government in Oxford, one of the world experts, most recognized experts on carbon accounting, and someone who is doing great effort trying to provide the best accounting principles to be applied to the world of climate change. So thank you, Professor Ramana, for being here. And Damien, you are a voice from this home country, from Guyana. Your experience in the National Protected Areas system, but also in Conservation International, is going to bring us a lot of interesting insights for this conversation. So let me begin by asking Damien, because he has some images to show to us. What do you believe is the most important invitation that Guyana can make to the rest of the Amazon biome countries based on the protection of specific landscapes? I know you're going to show us some of your research and the places where you have been working with in this country, but I want to start with you so that you can present these ideas and also to tell us how do you think Guyana can accelerate its 30 by 30 commitments. President Ali has announced that by December this year, the protected areas will double from last year, and he is also expressing publicly his commitment for the 30 before 30. So with that said, Damien, it's a pleasure to have you in this panel, and please go ahead and share us this important information.
Thanks a lot, President Duque. That's a really hard question to answer, and I usually I'm not good at with questions. I'm better at talking stories. So I thought maybe I could answer your question by talking a Guyanese story.
Perfect.
And sometimes, if I might stand, sometimes, well, at least my stories could be long. As a true Guyanese, story a little long. But sometimes stories could be one sentence. So I wanted to start off with the story, Guyana is not a real place. The Guyanese are smiling, because that is the thing that we say often, mostly sometimes in a negative context. But I want to accept that story and say Guyana is not a real place, it's beyond the real. It's magical. And we see there that green. I think Guyana really tells a story of the ability to exist in multiple contexts at once. Because I think you look around the room, look around Guyana, you realize a lot going on. And I would say that we could describe ourselves as a people full of complexity and contradiction, much like nature. And I wanted to really start my story, not on 30%, but on all the percent, on all of Guyana. Whoop. And what is really green in one context is hiding a deeper story, a more complex story. This is what is hidden under that green. And I'm going to talk about that in a bit. But I wanted today to take you into these landscapes. We often talk about Guyana like it's one thing. And and although we're one country or one Guyana, but I think there is a sentence there that should really be one Guyana, many Guyanas. So I'm going to take you to a few of the Guyanas. What you see in there is a formation that was formed 2 billion years ago on the bottom of an ocean. Where the arrow is pointing in terms of Earth's history, that's where that landscape was formed. And this is where we live. So this is a landscape that's deep in history and meaning. And I was trying to figure out how to tell this story, and I don't know who's kind of ever seen Captain Planet. But I wanted to kind of use that as a lens to tell this story. So I'm going to start in the sky and up in the Pacaraima Highlands. And that's that formation there. What you're looking at is Mount Roraima, and this again was formed at the bottom of the ocean and pushed up into the sky when Africa and South America said their final farewells. This is a landscape that has many meaning to many people. It's layered, not just in its formation, but in the stories that it's holding. And one of those layers contains gold. There was a piece in National Geographic about this landscape. It's unlike anything on the planet, really. And I want you to remember this picture, because this is when Africa and South America were separating from each other, and the Guyana Shield was being pushed up. I'm going to talk about this a second in terms of oil. But what happened here, and you can see that kind of green patch in the center. That is the Upper Mazaruni Basin, which is fed by these mountains in the sky. You can see it there maybe in a little better. And just to be clear, the side on your left is Venezuela, and the side on your right is Guyana. And there's no uncertainty about that. But what you're really looking is mountains that once existed 2 billion years ago. Water wore them down, turned them into sand, and laid them at the bottom of a sea, and created rock called sandstone. That is what holds this landscape. It tells stories about source, not just about water, but of a time when the planet wasn't even green, because plants had yet to evolve. This landscape has been looking over the planet since then. Remember I mentioned that map, and when Africa and South America were separating, one of the things that happened then was very violent. It was the ripping of this landscape, and where those red sections are, that is a failed fault. It's a rift system that splits Guyana and the Guyana Shield in half. This is the Rupununi. And this really, I would maybe talk about fire a bit here. Now, the Rupununi is a connection across worlds. It connects the Amazon to the Guyana Shield rivers, and it connects savannas to forests. And this is what it looks like. Now, millions of years ago, when this landscape was stretched to its breaking point, it dropped. When the crack formed, the land fell and was filled with volcanic stone and stuff. And off in the distance, you can see the edge of the rift. That is the Pacaraima Mountains, and that water is surrounding the Rupununi Road. That water brings species from across the two landscapes and connects it. And that road also connects us to our future. But this is a landscape shaped by fire. And in many ways, it was created by it. It is a part of what it is. And it keeps it cycling through water and fire. I want to big up the people from the Rupununi who might be in the room or might be looking at this outside. Let's give a little. But under the water, something remarkable is hidden. I'll take you there now. Millions of fish moving with the water to find nutrients and to grow again. is like a pulse that enriches the whole landscape. The nutrients comes out of the forest, spreads across the savanna, and brings life to it. Now, I wanted to take you quickly into the past, and this is what flowed through this Rift Valley a long time ago. It was a giant river system called the Proto-Berbice, and it actually emptied much further off of our coast than it is today, because sea levels were much lower back then. And this, again, this story of connections really connects water and oil. Guyana is not a real place, so in our case, water and oil does mix, because that river and many like it laid down the oil that sat there out in the ocean, waiting for Guyana to find it so that we could finally get the development we deserve. So nature has given us this opportunity, and let's not forget that, no? And I often wonder what it would have been like had we seen this oil being laid down. Lucky for us, it's still happening. And for that, I'm going to take you to the Northwest. So the Northwest is interesting because, and I'm going to talk about water here a little bit. The Northwest, as you see it there, actually raised from the ocean. It used to be underwater. So back then, all of that you see here, from those mangroves on the fringe to this flat expanse of flooded forest, that used to be ocean. That was the ocean between us and Africa as we said our farewells. So when the last ice age hit, global floods swamped Guyana's landscapes, covered it completely, and turned it into that. And millions, not millions. Actually, this has been happening for about 12,000 years, taking it from what it was to what it is now. So all of that light green is reclaimed by nature. It is land being pulled from the ocean. This is a landscape that Columbus would have sailed past during his third voyage. And he would have seen this, not knowing that there is a deep story about resilience and recovery. And as we look into this landscape, if you go there, the people will show you where the shell mounds are. And those shell mounds deep inland actually mark the original shoreline. So the connection here is deep, deeper than a lot of us realize. And those forests there are actually growing on top of some of the densest carbon on the planet. We call it pegas. Some people call it peat. But it's basically life growing on top of life and storing away the carbon. And that takes me to this. This is where my navel string is buried. And for those of you who aren't Guyanese, we have a saying that we have a tradition where we bury our umbilical cords in the ground. We bury our navel string. So when we talk about rooting, we're not talking about trees alone. We're talking about all of those navel strings, past and present, buried across this landscape. And if you look at this is Georgetown. You see those lines? Those lines were made by people. And here is where you have layers of stories, multiple contexts being inhabited all at once. You have stories of the indentured, enslaved, and indigenous laid on top of each other, marking a landscape. You talk about World Heritage Site. I would say the Guyana coast is a World Heritage Site, because those lines remind us that those people existed. And in that landscape, we have created conservancies. These are huge areas of water that feed our agriculture. They've also reverted in many ways back to a landscape somewhat natural. This is Ecosystem Services 101, and it's been working in Guyana for over a year. This is where we're looking when we talk about new conservation. But that's not the story I wanted to tell. I wanted to take you closer to my home. And if you look closely, my niece and nephew are there climbing in the mud. This is outside of Sheriff Street about 3 years ago, I believe. So getting ready to tell you this story, I went out and filmed the same spot today. This is what it looks like. I believe the presentation from India showed the satellite version of this. This is all natural. This is nature healing. This is a mud bank been traveling to us for 1,000 years. It emerges out of the Amazon, and it moves, and it comes. So while Guyana was going through all it has been going through, this mud bank has been coming. And it offers us a chance to heal and grow again as a coast. And this is kind of an image of what that looks like. That is a mud bank pulling up alongside a breach that happened to the east. Mangroves will eventually hold on to this mud and make Guyana grow again. So that is really the water and the heart, I would say. And then this is the final landscape that we're looking at now. And this is a 10-million-year-old plateau that stretches out from the southern part of Guyana. And it reminds us about our past and the fact that really, when we imagine our future, we often think about maybe tradition as something maybe no longer relevant. I believe one of the challenges we have as Guyanese is to try and inhabit our past, our present, and our future, and try to find ourselves in all of those places. I think this is a good example of a landscape that my father actually used to describe forests as the carpet of creation. Well, in this part of Guyana, the carpet thin, because it's on top of rock. The same rock that formed under the ocean and was pushed up. So if this soil is lost, there's nothing beneath it but rock. So when the soil goes, everything above it goes. The problem is that we live in a world that was valued on gold, and we have to go beneath this forest to get it. So until we value what's above more than we value what's beneath, we're always going to have this challenge. So that is basically a quick view of Guyana, and I'm going to kind of talk about this map maybe on the next question. But I think when we talk about what it is we're conserving, it's really important to understand it like in a lived sense, not just in an abstract way. No?
Thank you, Damian Fernandez. This is, I think you help us with this presentation to get into the essence of 30 by 30. And I will now switch to you, Senator Feingold. You have been a champion of 30 by 30. You have been present in U.S. politics as a senator from Wisconsin, as a very active voice in the Senate. And I want to ask a policy, but also a politics question associated with conservation. It seems for the rest of the world that there's too much polarization when the conversation comes to what should we do, what is effective, and how do we get things done about conservation. Especially in the last maybe decade in the United States, when the word climate hits Capitol Hill, it appears that it becomes very divisive. When the word conservation comes to the conversation, it unites. It becomes more bipartisan, more bicameral. With your knowledge, and now with the active role you play in the Global Campaign for Nature, how do you think we can get more members of the political establishment to be more committed to achieve 30 by 30? And what experiences would you bring to a country like Guyana that is, in times where many leaders are taking a step back in order to be maybe more complacent, Guyana, thanks to the leadership of President Ali, is making a double down?
Well, thank you, Mr. President. So you're certainly one leader who is not standing back. You are staying strong on both climate and nature, and I thank you for that. And you know what, you and I both ran for office. Your staff members tell you need to learn to do an elevator pitch, to do it in 30 seconds. I can't quite do that, but I'm going to try to get close, because I have found that in this area, whether you call it conservation or nature, that the level of cooperation and positive feelings, not just in the United States, but internationally, is much better. It's frankly been an enormous relief from what's been happening in my country. And so I want to quickly mention 4 ways in which this international efforts that are going on really help any country in the world achieve its 30 by 30 goals. The first one is political. You all know that on the climate effort, it took something called the High Ambition Coalition to help achieve the Paris Accord. Well, in this area, we have a High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People. Over 120 member countries are now in this coalition. It was crucial to get this 30 by 30 target, Montreal Kunming, that we've been talking about for 2 days. But for this group to work, we need to continue to have active members at high levels and to work collaboratively with other world leaders to ensure that 30 by 30 is a priority. So that's the political one, and yes, Guyana should be part of this. Look at this wonderful conference, and Guyana should be joining the High Ambition Coalition. The second piece is you can't just say to a country, well, okay, preserve some land and figure it out. They need help, and I'm going to mention finances in a minute, but they need technical help. They need best practices. So we at the Campaign for Nature have a secretariat of a program called SPACES. SPACES provides the help, the technical help, the plan to help achieve 30 by 30 within a country. You had your colleague, the President of the Dominican Republic, here yesterday announcing the good numbers that they have. They had the SPACES program. So it is crucial that that kind of effort go on. And the panel we just listened to was a brilliant explanation of how the monitoring aspect of this can happen. The third, of course, is financing. As I mentioned yesterday, we think that direct financing has to be part of that. What does that mean? Directly sending resources to local and indigenous peoples who have identified areas that need to be protected. And this is where this Legacy Landscape Fund from Germany is a model. There are 15 across the world. It's a 15-year commitment of $1 million a year, as long as the programs continue to meet its standards. And this can be greatly expanded. You and I both know the United States actually has just started a program like this, believe it or not, on a bipartisan basis. I know that might be a little hard to believe, but as a matter of fact, that is occurring, and we're trying to encourage other countries to do the same. Finally, very briefly, the legal regime. We haven't talked a lot about the oceans here at this conference, but it is absolutely critical. And right now, we have to ratify the High Seas Treaty, the BBNJ. A couple of months ago, we only had 21 countries ratifying it, and we have now got up to 50 after the Nice conference. This covers, right now, there is no legal regime covering the oceans of the world outside of the territorial limits. Some 75% of the water in this world does not have a legal regime protecting it, as mining companies and others are thinking about exploiting that resource. We would like to see Guyana join as one of the last 10. In fact, we'd love to see Guyana be number 60, which would make it the law of the planet. So I know it was maybe a little longer than you wanted for an answer, but I feel that these are international efforts that people should know about.
Senator, thank you so much for those insights. And I want to connect what Damian presented, what you have responded, with another very, how can I say, very disputable, if not debative issue, which has to do with carbon accounting. and has to do also in how can we take the best out of carbon accounting to apply it to 30 by 30 and the protection of nature and the protection of the Amazon biome. So I'm so delighted, Professor Ramana, that you're with us here in Guyana again, that you have been contributing with through E-Liability Institute, a nonprofit that you created, to have a historical base to bring back to today's time, in which was the application of the general accepted accounting practices early in the 20th century, and how can we try to bring that story today and bring those general accepted climate or emissions accounting practices that will give us the right elements, non-ideological, practical, measurable, scrutinizable, in order to have a much better policy action. So if we were to bring this and put it in the context of 30 by 30, how would you recommend to have the best accounting principles applicable to the protection of nature?
First off, thank you for having me, and I've learned a lot over the last 2 days that I've been here, and there's so much to learn about Guyana, and I'm certainly nowhere near qualified to speak to some of the sort of depth of the issues that we've touched on the last couple of days. But let me say that the thing I'm working on is a very small part of the puzzle, but it's a necessary part of the puzzle. That is to say that if you don't get this sorted, you won't solve the problem. If you get this sorted, it doesn't mean you will solve the problem. There's still a lot of things to do, but this is sort of the foundation of it. And what I mean by that is I've learned a lot about the importance of protecting biodiversity, in no small part thanks to my friendship with President Duque over the last several years. He's taken me to many parts of the world where I've learned a lot about it. And the problem, of course, is that the way our global economic system works is not aligned with protecting biodiversity. So at the very least, we need to create pro-market incentives to effectively not destroy this tremendous resource we have, but more importantly, to be even able to profit from the sustenance and from the sort of ongoing sort of preservation of our tremendous natural heritage. And so what this global carbon accounting system does, an emissions accounting system does, one that effectively ties into biodiversity as well, is align the economic incentives of corporations, the economic incentives of individuals with this great global challenge. You can't solve a problem as complex as climate change or as complex as sustaining biodiversity by hoping all of the people around the world will do the right thing all of the time. No problem in history can be solved or has ever been solved through that logic, because it's just not the way we are wired as human beings to work. So, and one of my favorite operating quotes, especially when dealing with a problem as complex as this, comes from a guy called William Temple, who was Archbishop of Canterbury in the 1940s during World War II. And he said, the art of governance is the art of ordering society so that self-interest produces what justice demands. And that's part of the challenge we face here. We have a thriving global economy. We have 1 billion people who are going to come into the middle class in the course of the next 10, 15 years. They're going to want cars and air conditioners and all of the wonderful things that, you know, create flourishing lives. And that's going to put enormous strain on the beauty that we've seen and we've heard about in the last couple of days. So we do have to create pro-market incentives in addition to all the other things in order to solve this problem. And that's where carbon accounting comes in. Now, it is a very mundane, boring, technical subject. I will be the first to admit that. But I will sort of maybe close with this quote or this historical anecdote, which is up until the year 1935, it's hard to imagine today, but the generally accepted accounting principles that we use in the global market economy didn't exist. So very hard to imagine today, but companies that traded on stock exchanges up through the 1930s, through the 1920s, 30s, made up their own definitions of performance. They made up their own definitions of revenue and assets and liabilities and so forth. And if you can imagine, that was a terrible idea because, of course, nobody knew what someone else was doing. It created all kinds of chaos and so forth. And so in 1935, it took 17 people to sit around a table and say, maybe it's a good idea that we all use the same rules of performance measurement to align the way global markets work. And what a great idea that was. On that, we've created trillions and trillions of value. We've lifted billions of people out of poverty. And so if we can do the same thing in the context of most immediately, most urgently, CO2 emissions, because that is the most urgent problem we face. But for all the reasons that we've heard, it's interconnected with preserving biodiversity. If we can do that, then we can align this greatest known force for human flourishing that we have with this really important necessity. And that's what we're focused on. So again, it is a very technical but very necessary part of solving this problem. Certainly not sufficient. Many, many other things need to be done.
Thank you so much, Professor Ramana. So I now move to the conversation to you, Gabriel. You have been an expert in environmental policies in Latin America. You worked on policy design, but you were also a minister in an Amazonic country like Peru. You had to face the challenges of having national ambition, but also having to navigate the tide when you have not a strong institutional capacity at the local level. So I would like to hear from you and how, after seeing what Damien showed us on the landscapes in Guyana, after listening to Senator Fingold and to Karthik, how do you think we can bring all this set of policies and efforts of 30 by 30 to be effective at the local level? What is it missing in order that we have the right institutional capacity, and how your own experience in Peru can enlighten this conversation with us?
Thank you very much, President. You need to bring all in, all the sectors, all the actors that are around. If you take in account that the first national park in Latin America was established in 1922, Nahuel Huapi National Park in Argentina, then it took us 100 years to reach 20%, which is around the representativity that we have right now in Latin America. And we're expecting to have 10%, additional 10% in 5 years from now. So the size of the task is huge and it's immense. So it's something that exceeds the capacity of the Ministry of the Environment or the Park Service of any country, even Brazil, that it's a giant and can put resources to do that. So you need to work in consolidating what you already have, the national parks and the national protected area systems that you have, but you need to bring the Ministry of Agriculture to work in, I don't know, a figure like exists in Peru, like the agro-biodiversity zones, which are managed lands by peasants that produce positive benefits for domesticated biodiversity that should be part of the accounting in this 30 by 30 if we want to reach there. We need, you need to convince the Ministry of Finance to put money on this. And how you do it? Not by trying to convince him about ecological representativity or endemisms or connectivity. But if you come to the Minister of Finance and tell him, we have this study, this is an actual one that we did with Conservation Strategy Fund, that shows that for every soil that you invest in the protected area system, you receive back 40 soles for each soil coming only from the tourism activity happening in protected areas, then he will say, this is an investment that I'm not aware of many public investments that have that level of return. And he will be interested, and he will be, should I put a little more money in the protected area system? Should I tell my officers to be much more comprehensive in terms of the Ministry of the Environment coming with a proposal for the establishment of a new protected area? Yeah, so we need to build this complementary narrative. Science and all this data that backs the establishment of protected areas, it's fine, and we have advanced as a conservation movement very much on it. But we need to complement that with the narrative and the facts relating to economy, relating to social issues that are the ones that will help to take the political decision, as the senator said, because at the end, the establishment of protected area is a political decision. It's something backed by science, but politically, because you are deciding to establish a specific regime to manage a piece of land and the natural resources that are there. And there is an opportunity cost that the decision maker have to be clearly aware of. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I know we're running out of time. Damian gave us a very interesting overview. So I'm going to ask hopefully 2 questions in which I am going to demand from you not more than 30 seconds. So Tom Friedman published this book some years ago called Hot, Flat, and Crowded. And the very last chapter of that book was called If You Were China for a Day. Basically what he said is, if you're China for a day, so yeah, you don't have to go to too much policy and negotiations, you don't have to deal too much with political turf, and you have to make those decisions that is just on spot, that is just depend on you. And I'll start with you, Senator Feingold. If you were China for a day, what decision would you make on 30 by 30 that sometimes the political spectrum in democracies don't allow to happen that fast?
I think what I try to do in my country is to take advantage of the point that you made at the beginning, that when it comes to things like 30 by 30, it does not have the same toxicity as the climate issue right now. Let me just say, I think it's ridiculous that there is any question about the climate issue, but that happens to be a political reality in the United States. And so engaging people of both political parties to be aggressive, and in fact, this program I just mentioned to you, that's been initiated in the United States, was passed in December. After Donald Trump was elected, one of the main co-sponsors was Lindsey Graham, another one was Marco Rubio. So there is an opportunity here, I think, for the administration, for Congress, for both parties to try to work together to achieve a strong 30 by 30 profile in the United States. Look, there are interests that are concerned, ranchers, farmers, others, but they also are some of the people who in the end care a great deal about making sure the environment is okay. So I think I would be very aggressive about it politically because there's an opportunity there.
Thank you. Karthik, if you were China for a day, what decision would you make on climate accounting or carbon accounting?
I wouldn't want to be China for a day. I think one of the great strengths of Guyana and my 2 countries, the United States and the United Kingdom, is that they're democracies. And I think that there has to be a political process through which this works through. One of the challenges we have with the climate problem in the United States is that there were too many decisions that were made by experts outside of the political process, and the climate issue became politicized, it became seen as elitist, and I think that's the problem. So I wouldn't want to sort of push anything through. I'd say it needs to have its legitimacy from the bottom up, and I think that's the great strength of democracies, and we should celebrate that.
You have become a great politician, Karthik, I must say. But yeah, you can give him an applause as well. Damien, if you were China for a day, what decision would you make in Guyana in order to accelerate the protection of the landscapes you showed?
I need the help of my Guyanese Mati in the room. Everybody who saw where their navel string was buried on the map, could you please just stand up for a second so people can see you? Don't be afraid. Stand. You saw where your navel strings were buried? Did you see where your parents' navel strings were buried? Right. If I was China for a day, I would say it's time for us to listen to these stories.
Good.
And because the image of the navel string is powerful because it talks about the connection between people and their stories, not just now, but across time. And there are stories that would fill more than 30%. Stories would flow across the Guyana Shield just from Guyana alone. And I think Guyana comes from a completely different point of view. I think you're mentioning the first protected area in Latin America. Guyana had the first protected area in the Amazon. It wouldn't be 37 years until Guyana actually became its own country. So as we inhabit the past in all of its discomfort, even me, I think about myself when I just started out and the type of conservation I did, and I kind of feel a little uncomfortable about that. And I think getting comfortable with that discomfort of our past and allowing it to shape the future, I think is what we need to begin doing. And we can only do that if we get quiet and listen to the stories that have yet to be told. That's what I would.
That's very powerful. Thank you so much, Damien. Gabriel, if you were China for a day, what decision would you make that would accelerate the 30 by 30 in Latin America?
I will take advantage of the leverage and the leadership that they have all around the world and say, well, we need to build a global coalition to deal with the nature crisis. We are not able to do it by ourselves separately. We need to be all aligned on this, and we are, well, if I'm China, I am available to provide technology, to provide financing, to provide the means of implementations that are needed for this, and the political will to move this ahead.
And my final question, and I'll start again with you, Senator Feingold. Finance. What do you think is the financial product that we should use as maybe the most effective vehicle to get more money into 30 by 30?
Well, I think we're finding as a campaign for nature that when we speak to countries that have resources, global north countries, but also some more recently well-to-do countries such as Singapore, United Arab Emirates, and others, they care about their reputation. And they're interested in having a broader reputation than just striking oil. And what they want to do is prove that they care about things like nature. And in connection with your previous remarks, it's a relatively positive thing for them to do. So I believe, again, direct financing. I don't think the problem is that local people don't know what to do on this. Local and indigenous people know exactly what to do with this. If they are provided with the resources, as we saw in the demonstration from the Field Museum, there's wonders that can occur. But I do believe that there is a growing range of countries that have the resources that can finally rectify the fact that the global north basically helped diminish nature, and it is time for global north to pay for enhancing nature in global south.
Thank you so much, Senator. Karthik, you heard this morning, President of COP30, Ambassador Correa, mention about the Tropical Forest Financial Facility, the TFFF. TFFF is there. It's going to be a big conversation in COP30. But for now, it has great intentions, no money. We hopefully expect to see more money. But how do you think, based on the finance products available and also in bringing the right accounting, how do you think we can give real life and real power to this idea of the TFFF?
Yeah, so the quickest path to this today is to connect effectively short-term or shorter-term nature-based reforestation initiatives with longer-term solutions to the climate problem. In the long term, we need something that looks like direct air capture and mineralization, because what we've done is we've taken carbon from sort of geological stores and put it in the atmosphere, so nature-based or sort of short-cycle solutions are not going to be something that will work in the very long run. But in the short run, it's going to take a long time for us to build the DACM infrastructure we need. So in the short run, these kind of nature-based offsets will be something that we can use to, and if we can create an economic system where companies trade on that advantage, then you know, they will be incentivized to buy those products. And we've actually seen a lot of interest from very wealthy companies to buy those products so that they can have true net zero offerings to their customers. And so that would be, I think, the quickest path to get a lot of capital into this space. I don't think, I mean, as much as I'm sympathetic to the point that Senator Feingold made about, you know, the debt owed by the global north to the global south, the political reality in the global north, even in Europe today, is such that that is not going to happen. So we might as well create a commercial reality.
Thank you so much, Karthik. Gabriel, how do you envision that indigenous communities can be more active, more productive, and more results-oriented in the implementation of 30 by 30? And what instruments do you think we have to build in order to get them more involved and more confident that, in fact, there can be a way of living in their ecosystemical services?
Thank you for the question. I think we need to provide them with certain enabling conditions, because we are putting too much pressure on them, making them responsible for the conservation of huge territories without having what they need. In the specific experience of Latin America, land use planning, land tenure, technical assistance, access to finance are the missing links that will be needed to be available for indigenous communities, for local communities, to lead the conservation process, to be able to engage effectively with the state, with the private sector in this effort. So there is this agenda of work where the states, where the governments have a lot to say in terms of how do you provide them with the tools for them to have a positive engagement and a functional engagement in the process.
Thank you. And Damian, I will finish with you. When I was watching the images that you showed, it always came to my mind a book that I read recently about Guyana called The Story of Guyana. And I remember that at the beginning of that book, there was this chapter about El Dorado. And many of the foreigners that came here in the search of El Dorado, they were looking for this story about gold and about this precious metal that they had to found in order to become rich. But looking at what you showed, the real El Dorado of Guyana is that landscape, is that natural asset, is this territory that has this beautiful combination of tropical forest and tepuyes that hosts so many species. How can we get, through education, more response and more acknowledgement of the people that that treasure is the most important asset that Guyana has? And how can we show to the world that it's through the protection of those assets that Guyana has even more resources and reserves than what it has now in oil in the ocean?
Oh yeah, that's a big question. I often think about Guyana as carbon country, and we got above ground carbon and we below ground carbon, and the values of that are kind of dancing with each other, and we don't want to give up one for the other in essence, and we really are in an unusual place. The reality, however, is that you have this metal that is shiny and looks like the sun, and we decided a long time ago in searching for El Dorado that that has value. We've abstracted value onto that metal. And then you have this machine that clips carbon from the air, turns it into liquid and then solid, produces food from it, and all it needs is a little sun and water and soil. And we've decided that this metal is more valuable than these trees. And not just the trees, the whole forest. So I believe that Guyana invites people to come away from this abstraction of economy and a kind of return. Oftentimes economy is like second nature, and I often challenge people to go below. What is, if that is second nature, what is first? And I think we're eroding the foundation on which we have built our economies by going after metals and rare earth minerals and stuff without realizing what we're doing. I believe that Guyana's message is that it's time we kind of realize that maybe with a little bit of humility that we are trying to save the forest, but really the forest is trying to save us. It's our survival we're fighting for. And until we get that and begin to value that, I believe we're going to be struggling with this bit of finance issue. But I think it's a message whose time has come, and Guyana is kind of looking at conservation from a place of abundance. So it's not about 30%, it's about our collective future. We want to step outside of protected areas and design new models of conservation built on culture, not imposed on it. And I think really we're looking for finding partnerships that we can go on this path together. And we're looking for partners to help build bridges, not be the bridge. Because when you guys go back to where you're from, it's the public servants, the communities, and the Guyanese families that takes this vision forward and makes it real. So I think once we begin to situate the people who this belongs to in the center of this conversation, I think we're going to be okay. Not true?
Yes. So Damien, Gabriel, Senator Feingold, Karthik, thank you very much. And before I close, I want to express my deepest gratitude for all the President's team here in Guyana and members of the Guyanese government for making this Global Biodiversity Alliance possible, the leadership of President Ali. But I want to highlight the work of Marcia, Pradeepa, also Nick, Kiana, and many others who have put so much effort, the EPA, all this government that has been working in order to make this possible. And also, if you allow me, I want to thank the members of my team that have also worked in this. Felipe Coral, Carolina Salgado, Laura Nao, who are here, have also worked a lot with most of your teams. So I really want to say that this country has something very special. I have a big love for Guyana. And I've always been inspired. Every time I come, I see progress, I see advance, and it's a development lab. But let's use this opportunity of the Global Biodiversity Alliance to acknowledge something. In this country, many decades ago, a revolution took place in the Demerara that triggered the overall reflection in that time in the United Kingdom for the abolishment of slavery. And something that started here, this flame that was initiated here, made a big change that also started creating more replicable effects in the rest of the planet. I hope that this Global Biodiversity Alliance, we don't take it for granted as another venue, as another opportunity, as another gathering, as another conversation. What's really happening here is historical, that in the times we live, we have a leadership and a president that wants to have this conversation, invite other heads of state, sign a declaration, invite stakeholders, and for us to bring specific proposals to COP30. So I believe that what has been discussed here in these 2 days, and we're going to listen in the closing ceremony, what has happened in the last 2 days is going to have an impact. and the impact is going to be that there's going to be a specific recommendation on smart finance for COP30 in order to achieve 30 by 30 to protect these landscapes and to understand that biodiversity is an asset that deserves to have an accounting that countries can use to determine their gross biodiversity product. I think all the stakeholders that are here are motivated by this. So I just hope that all that we have discussed will trigger that flame that is needed in times where many people are taking steps back. Here is a doubling down on the bet that without biodiversity, without nature, without natural capital, there won't be effective development. Thank you so much for listening to this panel, and we look forward to the next part of the agenda. Thanks a lot.
Will be chaired by Professor Kartik Romano, Professor of Business and Public Policy for Oxford University. At this time, I will also like to invite those participants of the Lula Room who were part of the concurrent sessions. You can take the time to make your way into the dome.
Marcus. Nature the last couple of days. And Brian, of course, is a leading conservationist in this field, specializing in land and wildlife protection. And he was educated at Rollins College in Colorado. Welcome, Brian. Andy Seidel is the Senior Technical Advisor at the UNDP's Biodiversity Finance Initiative. And he's also a professor of environmental and developmental economics at Colorado State University. And Andy was educated at the University of Wisconsin and received his PhD from the University of Florida. And Marcus is a senior partner at McKinsey. He has been a leader in the sustainability practice at McKinsey, based out of its Brazil offices for the last 2 decades. And Marcus was, my favorite thing about Marcus was that he was educated at MIT, like me. So we've got a fabulous panelists, set of panelists up here, and our charge in this session is to build nature's case for unlocking biodiversity financing. I think we are all aligned on the need for that financing, but we're also aligned on the fact that financing is very scarce in the world today. Interest rates are high, and the cost of capital is very high. So we have to, in the 20 minutes we've been given, do a really good job of building nature's case. And so what I thought we'd do is break it down into a couple of chunks so that we can first make the economic case for biodiversity, drawing on the wisdom of the panelists here, and then talk about how it is we might actually attract financing to this space. And that, of course, needs us to appreciate where the financing gaps actually are, because the last thing we want to do is attract finance to areas that are already well financed, to the extent that that is, in fact, the case. So, and then finally, we'll do a quick lightning round with the panel to get a couple of ideas that we can put into practice, hopefully in the next year, where we've got Brazil's fantastic leadership of the COP presidency. So, starting with the economic case for biodiversity, well, almost all of us have economic backgrounds. I spent a good part of my career teaching economics, so I thought we would break it down into microeconomic and macroeconomic cases for biodiversity. And let's first start with the microeconomic case for biodiversity. Is there a microeconomic case for biodiversity? And by that I mean, can we rely sufficiently on consumer preferences to support biodiversity activities? So, for instance, one of the panelists who was supposed to join us, but unfortunately couldn't, it was from Natura and Company, which is leading biodiversity or leading consumer provider in the biodiversity space. So I'd love to get the panelists' perspective on this question of whether the microeconomic markets for biodiversity are sufficiently vibrant and deep to make an economic case that way. And Brian, can we start with you?
Is that okay? I think the best way to look at this is there's actually some great data on this. There's an organization called UBET, which puts out a study called the Biodiversity Barometer. I hope all of you will get a chance to read it because I don't have time to summarize it here. But it basically they've done interviews since I believe 2009, and they looked at consumer attitudes towards biodiversity. And the good news is that across the world, awareness of biodiversity is increasing. Consumers want to see more products that have biodiversity in them, but there's a big skepticism that remains that companies are actually doing the right thing. They believe they have a moral responsibility to. So we have this intention, but we have a trust gap that needs to be closed. So until that trust gap is closed, I would say, in the interest of time, no.
Okay. Andy?
Just to the microeconomics?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we have a partial answer, right? We can capture some of the values of natural capital and nature in markets and find a behavioral trace that is actionable, particularly around non-consumptive goods and non-consumptive values. But there are also many public values that are going to require different sorts of investments and different sorts of incentives in order to move society forward on protection and conservation and stewardship.
Right. So there is there's a whole sort of part of this that is outside of what will plausibly be served by the microeconomics of biodiversity. Marcus, please.
Carter, what I would say is that we should hope for consumer preference, we should pray for it, but we should not rely on it. Okay? So, I mean, for example, Natura, you mentioned.
Yeah.
Natura built a whole brand on nature, and people buy it in droves, but not because they're doing good for nature. It's just because, you know, it's a cool brand. That's one case. The other one is acai. Acai today is a multi-billion-dollar value chain with private equity. You know, there's no funding issue with acai. We need more acais. We need scalable products from the forest, you know, that are in harmony, but also at scale. I've been for 15 years working in the Amazon, in Brazil mostly, and there are just too many small, non-scalable ideas. I mean, that's fine, but from those we need to find a way to systematically bubble at scale global products.
Yeah. Okay, so the first takeaway, and feel free to challenge me on this, but the first takeaway appears to be that there is a case to be made for the microeconomics of biodiversity. We've seen some successful companies do this. Most companies in this space perhaps are unable to scale. They're unable to get to a place where they will make a measurable impact, but that's okay. But overall, the sense is whatever comes out of the microeconomics of diversity in terms of satisfying consumer preferences isn't going to be enough to solve the whole problem that's in front of us. Is that okay? Good. So that gives us something that we can work with. That means that there is a second part to this, which is the macroeconomics of biodiversity, which is to say that there is going to be part of this problem that needs to be solved at a structural level, that needs to be solved at a public goods type of level. And what do you see as the key barriers to building a robust economic case on the macroeconomics of biodiversity? I'm happy to start with you again, Brian.
The biggest challenge we face right now is the world spends a tremendous amount more subsidizing the destruction of nature than it does for the protection of nature. We have a $700 billion annual biodiversity finance gap. Of that, to close that gap, the estimates are that about 500 billion of that can be closed by repurposing, reforming, reallocating subsidies from those that harm nature to those that conserve nature. So until we start to address the subsidies, those that are destroying nature, that are taking away in short-term profit in a way that destroy the opportunity to ever conserve nature, we won't close this gap. So that's the number one issue that we need to do to close this gap. Second, we need to make sure those externalities are charged. So companies don't see pollution as a free thing that they can do. That's got to be part of the economic case and put into the system. And then finally, governments have to put in the structural changes, the incentives and the regulations in order for any of these new market-based or so-called innovative solutions can be scaled up. I think we need to change some of those rules if we're ever going to close this gap.
Excellent. Andy?
Sure, to be complimentary, hopefully. Studies of economic value of nature and tools to visualize them have raised global awareness and of the many and varied contributions of nature to human well-being. And although that progress has been made through system of environmental economic accounts and WAVES that was mentioned in the last session and INVEST at Stanford, policy influence has been a bit more scarce. And private sector investment pipelines have been more scarce indeed. So the economics here can only be as good as the ecology, which my ecologist friends like me to say. And so the eventual development of better measures, as the Yale crew were talking about, of ecosystem service changes and maintenance due to management over time, the differentiating the effects of management as opposed to climate change, for example, and knowing what your baseline is, what you're with and without as opposed to your before and after. And some of those measures have been proposed over the last couple of days. Those have potential to improve our understanding of the incremental and additional value of managed and mature ecosystems that have stymied some efforts to reward stewardship in the past. That is, currently restoration tends to pay and conservation tends not to. So a lot of the themes from the last 2 days are how do we actually incentivize stewardship for extant ecosystems and the improvement or maintenance of those ecosystem services.
That's an excellent insight about the distinction between restoration and conservation because of the way markets function. And one of the things we've done in the financial economy to in some sense, internalize those externalities is to put these so-called off-balance sheet assets onto balance sheets. And once you start recognizing them as assets on balance sheets, then of course you do create an incentive to do that. So maybe that's something that we can explore and take away as part of the action items from this. Marcus, you've been doing some thinking on the macroeconomics as well as part of your career for the last 20 years, so please.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we just need to put in perspective is that the challenge to make the case for biodiversity on the macro level, it's, I would say, much more complex than carbon, than global warming, yes. Right? And I mean, we've been doing that for 30 years with carbon, and there are still some people who have, or pretend to have the difficulty of understanding it. And it's the causality is simple. It's CO2 and whatever, methane and greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. So it's easy to explain. Now, biodiversity has like many spillovers, as you call them, many, 20, 30. So I think the challenge that we have is making that case in a structured fashion and maybe not to confuse people. I think we should not decouple the discussion from the carbon discussion. I think there is a similar, nature-based carbon at least, okay? So that's, I think it's, the case is there. but we should not be over-optimistic that we're gonna solve it. I think this initiative here is the beginning. We are planting a seed that Vice President Jacques Davis said yesterday. It's starting small, but it can be very important. But it will take time.
Yeah, and you've hit on something really important there, which is the complexity associated with biodiversity when you compare it to some of the other problems, like, say, the carbon problem. Albert Einstein is apocryphally said to have remarked, everything should be made as simple as possible, but no simpler.
Yeah.
So one of the things we need to do here is to figure out where to draw that line, because obviously the complexity associated with biodiversity, if we recognize it in its full glory, means we'll never solve the problem.
Yeah.
So we have to abstract away from that complexity, but to a point where we can realistically tie it into something else that we're pursuing, whether it's the pursuit of profit in capital markets or some other regulation that has legs. Now, implicit in, of course, managing the macroeconomics is regulation, and we've spent a fair bit of time talking about that over the last couple of days, either implicitly or explicitly. But, whether we like it or not, the zeitgeist of the moment, the world is sort of exhausted of regulation. And so are there carrot-based approaches here that we're perhaps, or haven't explored enough? And I just want to do one more lightning round on macro before we move on and say, are there non-regulatory or carrot-based, like non-stick, but carrot-based approaches to align the problem on macroeconomics of biodiversity with other things, other goods that we pursue in the real economy? Marcus?
I think that would depend on the different services of biodiversity. For example, if you have watershed issues which affect a specific community, it's much easier for you to make the case, and I've seen that happening with private sector participation, because the benefit is tangible. It's circumscribed to let's say, a limited number of players. I think the more, let's say, diffuse externalities provided by biodiversity, then we get in the tragedy of the commons, right? Everybody wants the benefits, but nobody wants to pay for it.
That's right, yeah. Brian?
Yeah, I think a couple things. We talked about the TFFF, the Tropical Forest Forever Facility today. Really exciting, innovative approach that is more of a carrot for countries to maintain their low levels of deforestation in a way that also provides some profits for investors. So great example that we can take away from this alliance. Some specific industries, I think to Marcus's point, you look at the insurance industry, it benefits for those countries that protect their mangroves and for their and wetlands for prevent flooding. I think there's an economic case there for insurance companies to finance biodiversity. The health industry, we know that spending time outdoors is great for mental and physical health. We know that protecting nature prevents pandemics and other zoonotic diseases. So there's some select industries, and to Marcus's point, if we can align those industries with their specific benefits and costs, I think there's an option there that we're just starting to explore, and one that has real promise.
I love the shout out to the insurance industry, again, something we've underexplored over the last couple of days, but perhaps something we can pick up in the action items from this conference. Andy.
Sure. Piling on with the insurance industry, we've been doing a little bit of work on human-wildlife conflict insurance in Nepal, Bhutan, and some other places. That helps to better align the incentives that folks face. But often what you're dealing with in these situations are farmers often, who are working at subsistence level. And so they implicitly have a higher discount rate, if you will. And so they're less likely to be investing in their futures through some sort of formal financial mechanism. And so having a setup that is either backed up by a compensatory approach or subsidizing the fees that one would have to pay, or doing some sort of clustering, means that you have to be a bit more innovative or a lot more innovative in order to make them work, and they don't simply just transfer from Nebraska to Paro.
That's right. Yeah, and that's the challenge we face in this space, and goes back to this notion of simplification, where the nature of the problem in different geographies is so distinctive. But unless we find some sort of fungible metric to connect it globally, we will end up with these sort of isolated pockets that are underfunded. And that actually transitions us to the second pasture that I want us to spend some time grazing on, which is this question of the biodiversity finance gap, or the underfunding. Where do you think that underfunding is greatest? And we can focus, you can focus your responses either on product markets or on geographical markets. If you say, where should we channel our collective energy and our collective intellect to channel funding in this? Is it a particular set of products? Is it or outputs that are being underfunded? Or is it a particular set of geographies, perhaps, for instance, the Amazon, that are being underfunded? And you might have different perspectives. So just to mix things up, Marcus, I'm going to start with you. Yeah.
Well, I think there's need for funding everywhere, right? And public, private, extraterrestrial. I mean, we're taking donations from whoever can, because the gap is just growing. I think the United Nations has said that it's close to $200 billion in funding, where the Rio Aligned scenarios ask for up to 700 billion. So the gap is huge. I tend to believe that, from a micro to macro, the gap is much bigger on the macro level. Because honestly, on the micro, over time, if there's a good idea, it can take 1 year, it can take 30 years. But the market-based mechanisms will eventually recognize it. Where at the macro level, where we have all the services provided by local communities, by the ecosystems, they're just too diffuse. So I think the lens for me is much more on the macro. Now, geography-wise, if you look at theory, I think it will tell you that the biggest gaps are actually in Asia right now, because all the reforestation they need to do, right? Now, so say, so the biggest gap is in Asia, it's not in LATAM, because LATAM has actually conserved much more its forests, and it's, considered to be cheaper to conserve versus to reforest. Now, in practice, I think the biggest need is in LATAM, because honestly, it's much better business to reforest and do restoration. The growth rates in LATAM are the highest in the world. So I would say, being pragmatic, I think LATAM is the place where we need to put focus on.
Excellent. Well, it'd be hard to get away with this audience if you didn't include that.
And by the way, I'm Brazilian, okay? So I'm a self-interest, okay?
Andy, where's the biggest gap?
Well, I think geographically, as I think was just brought up at the end of the last session, the ocean finance, it's our biggest problem and is our most ignored problem, I think. And clearly, it's our future. So, and geographically, that's where I would go. In terms of topically, engaging private sector is going to be the biggest bugaboo for us, I think. We know about public finance. We can always call for more resources, but finding ways to incentivize pro-biodiversity, pro-planet behavior using the market system is the big trick.
Yeah, and the shout out to the oceans, because of course ocean acidification has implications on CO2 absorption there, and so it's something that we have to. And of course the problem, of course, with the oceans is nobody owns it, and that creates its own challenges. Brian?
Geographically, we know biodiversity isn't distributed evenly throughout the planet, right? It's concentrated in the tropics. We saw that great presentation from the Field Museum and from Yale about this new species here in Guyana, an incredible place. I think if we look at where finance for biodiversity is concentrated, it's in the global north. My country, the United States, we spend a tremendous amount, even not enough, but on our national park system and others. But you see other countries that have tiny budgets that have incredible biodiversity that they need to conserve. So We need to see more funding go to the tropics, and in the tropics we need it to go to the indigenous peoples and the frontline communities who are the stewards of that biodiversity, who have that tremendous knowledge of the areas and can go far with their resources. So I think geographically we've got to do that. I think Andy's point in the ocean is well taken. In terms of where do we get that money to close that gap? 80% of the budgets currently for biodiversity come from the public sector. That's been true for the last several decades. If we want to get more private money, we're going to have to create some of these new systems. So I think we can get more private money, but it's not going to happen just voluntarily. I'm very skeptical that if we just say voluntarily that'll occur. Markets have existed for 10,000 years. And they're very efficient. And in those 10,000 years, they haven't efficiently found a way to pay for nature. So what is wrong there? Why is that the case? They're very efficient at destroying nature, right? We found that they've made a lot of money on that. And that's because of the systems we have in place aren't incentivizing or aren't regulating. So we have to go on one of those two ways. Do we regulate them to put the private sector money into nature? Do we incentivize them? But we have to create that infrastructure if we are to do that. Just saying that it's going to happen voluntarily because we at the Campaign for Nature came up with some new innovative scheme, I'm skeptical, right? We have to create those systems at a broad scale. But if we do that, there's a lot of money and there's a lot of innovation in the market system that could come in here, and we need it to come in here. So I think as much as we're relying on the market system, we need to really bring them into the system.
Absolutely, and so it sounds like there's a broad consensus that you get a big bang for your buck here in the tropics, in the rainforests in particular, but also we can't neglect the oceans, and we're going to have to find a way, of course, to drive the funding here at scale. Yes. Now, let's just spend a little bit of time understanding why we have this gap, and there are a couple of reasons. I've just sort of speculated with you in sort of pre-meeting notes. Is it due to an inadequate understanding of the benefits? Is this an informational campaign that we need to be investing in? Is it, that there are perhaps unresolved governance risks here, that there are willing funders, but, they're worried about expropriation? There's lots of eyes that are rolled when companies or countries come out with these green bonds and blue bonds, et cetera, and say, oh, but when the next government comes in, how do you know you're not going to be expropriated? And so is it a governance challenge? Is it a challenge associated with human capital? Maybe it's because all of the best people in the world go work in derivatives markets in Wall Street as opposed to, focusing their energy on this. So what strikes you as sort of the leading causes for this funding gap? And if we were to channel our energies out of the action items from this conference, again, let me quote Jim Collins, says, if you have more than 3 priorities, you have no priorities. So where would you really sort of prioritize the causal factors for this funding gap? And Marcus, I'll start with you again.
Okay. Yeah. So I would say that based on what we discussed in the last 25 minutes or so, I would start with the governance risk. I think that's honestly, for me, is in the incentives, that's for me, it's the number one. I think the number 2 is there's still too much uncertainty about what is the value of biodiversity. We just finished a collaboration with CI, and other institutions that work in Guyana, trying to value biodiversity in the Amazon and in Guyana. And we based in, we started from established approach from academia and so forth. And the global value of biodiversity ranges from $70 to $250 trillion a year, according to studies. Now, that's twice the size of the global economy. So when you come up with a number like this, it's very hard to engage in a dialogue, right? So I think there is still a lot of work that needs to be done, and then you can relate to your talent question. I wouldn't call talent, I would call it energy, focus on aligning, and we're never going to get to the right number. It's impossible, it's too complex, but a number that we feel that it's credible. Okay, so for me, number 1 is governance, number 2 is having the standards, having at least a framework that gives you a credible value for biodiversity.
Andy?
I think among our primary problems remains lack of information. I don't necessarily think it's on the benefits side of the equation. We can throw a big number out there and we can raise awareness, And that's all we need, really. But what we don't know or hadn't known until recently is the supply side, the cost side of the equation. So we knew we're doing better on economic accounting, natural capital accounting. Where we are lacking is on the other side. So what are we investing? As recently as the COP10, were donor countries willing to donate and recipient countries saying, we need more money. But the donor countries are saying, well, what are you doing now? What are you investing now? Where is it? What's the return on that investment? How do I know that I'm getting my biggest bang for the buck? Which goes back to the last question. Didn't have a methodology for that. And the project that I've been working on now for the last 10 years, this Biodiversity Finance Initiative, is doing that, trying to establish a methodology that says, okay, what's the context? What's the legal context? Is there liability? Have you defined what ecosystem services are so that you could actually fine somebody for damaging it? That's a policy and institutional review. Then where are you investing currently in the public sector, private sector, and civil society? That's the biodiversity expenditure review. You go line by line by line, trying to find what categories of expenditures. It's not just in the parks and protected areas, but it's in ag and it's in planning and it's everywhere. Whole of government approach. What's the attribution rate? We know it's not 100% always, but some of that is going toward biodiversity. Where is it? How do we set up a system so that's comparable across countries so we can learn? Then, what's our financial need? Do we know? We don't. So how would we establish what that is? Let's maybe start with an NBSAP and try to cost the NBSAP. That would allow us to understand what our context is, what we're spending and what we need. Then we need a plan. We need a plan to try to figure out what we should do first, what's our return on investment, and we need to remember, of course, always, that biodiversity investment occurs on the ground first and only. So it's local. So when we make grand global statements about the value of biodiversity is, 3 times the global GDP, cool. But what are we going to do about that? So what we're going to do about that is go right down to the local level and start not imposing, but having actions that improve coral reefs and improve restorative agriculture. And those things then map all the way up to the international level so that we can then solve the problem globally.
Excellent. Okay, so an informational challenge that you've already seen some success in that space in trying to close that gap.
We have. So far we've mobilized about $1.6 billion off of a $40 million investment, distributed across dozens, actually about 150 different types of finance solutions, many of which were mentioned here over the last couple of days.
Excellent. Okay. Ron?
I think if we're to see biodiversity really close the finance gap, awareness has got to be a thing. If we're going to get businesses to want to prioritize it, if we're going to get governments to want to set up those systems, those incentives, if we're going to get philanthropy to want to increase it, biodiversity needs to become a much bigger political, policy, educational issue in society, which is why this event is so spectacular, that we're seeing this at the highest level here. And it's commendable that President Ali has brought us all here today and President Duque to help drive the leadership in this. That's what we need around the world to make this possible. If we can do that, we've seen climate change becomes a bigger political priority. We get more private investment, we get more public investment, we get more philanthropic investment, we get more of the best minds, and we get universities prioritizing it, businesses. And biodiversity's moment is coming. It's started to see that. We've seen sparks of it, but we're not there yet. And we've taken it for granted for too long across the world until the point where we've gotten to the recognition that we are losing species at a rate unprecedented in human history. So the crisis is now. We all in this room, I think, know that that's why we're here. But until the rest of the world starts to feel that, I don't think we close the finance gap. And so as much as it's an economic issue, it's also an education issue, a policy issue, an issue of awareness and communications.
So kudos to the conference organizers for
Absolutely.
addressing that problem. We're at time, so final lightning round. I'll start with you, Brian. One lesson you've learned, perhaps in the last year, that gives you cause for optimism that we can in fact close this funding gap.
I would say that the new finance mechanisms like the Legacy Landscape Fund that came forward, it was an idea. It got Christoph Schenk, who's here from Frankfurt Zoological Society, came up with this idea, brought people together. German government took it on, philanthropists, German government put more money, they're funding protected areas. We have now endowed protected areas in some of the most biodiverse places. So people with good ideas, with determination can make it happen. That's been positive. We can replicate that in other countries and expand that. So that's been a very positive lesson I've seen.
Excellent. Andy?
Sure. As we've been working on this for about a dozen years now for Biodiversity Finance Initiative, we've learned quite a bit. And as we ramp up from 41 countries to 133 due to the GBF and support by the GEF, I think above all we've learned that the trite bumper sticker ready phrase, think globally but act locally, resonates, and that biodiversity loss, climate change, and land degradation affect the most vulnerable the most. And we found that there's some keys to success in trying to implement a country-led community of practice where local ownership and political commitment are important, champions are important, inclusive governance, science and data, as came up in the last section, sustainable finance, as we're talking about now, capacity building and partnerships and innovation and communication are keys to unlock the solutions that are both local and global problems.
Excellent. Marcus?
Reason for hope. I would stay local.
Yeah.
I would say that what we witnessed in the last 2 days was amazing. And the fact that, as President Duque mentioned just in the previous panel, that, one small action can lead to tremendous world-changing, like the end of slavery, happen here. Also, we have to recognize that Guyana is probably by far the world leader in conservation. And 2009, that's when it started, is the first low carbon plan. Guyana was probably one of the first, I don't know, if not the first, one of the top first 5 countries which did low carbon plan. So, and nowadays it's recognized as a world leader. So the reason for hope is what we are right now. I think we are launching a movement. We have several countries participating. Maybe next year we can get some exponential growth and start, and then look back a couple of years and say, hey, it all started in Georgetown.
Excellent. Okay, so we have our marching orders to wrap up, and so hopefully on time and under budget, we're going to hand back to the chair so that we can go to the final part of the conference. And please join me in thanking my panelists.
Thank you, panelists, and excellent job by the moderator for the efficient use of the time. And now we will proceed with a short clip before moving into the closing plenary. This video is by Dr. Sudesh Kumar Yadev of the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research.
The organization of this country operates under the Ministry of Science and Technology, Government of India. CSIR has a network of over 37 laboratories, 4 units and 39 extension centers, and its headquarters at New Delhi, the capital city of India. It conducts cutting-edge research in the areas like aerospace, biotechnology, chemicals, energy and environment. CSIR has significantly contributed to India's scientific and industrial development through innovation, patents and public services working under different clusters like biological, chemical engineering, information and physical sciences. Government of Ghana is planning to set up an international center for biodiversity conservation in Guyana and is keen to develop international linkages for biodiversity conservation related effort. With the above objective, I would like to propose several potential areas for our mutual collaborations in the area of animal biodiversity. CSIR CCMB has established the Laboratory for Conservation and Endangered Species, Wildlife Forensics, Biobanking, Assisted Reproduction and Population Genetics. Similarly, in the area of plant biodiversity, CSIR IHBT, CSIR CMAP, CSIR NBRI, CSIR IIIM, CSIR CFTRI, they are working in the areas related to conservation of plant sciences and biodiversity, forest ecology, climate change, and also benefit sharing to local communities can be of great help to Guyana. The third biodiversity ecosystem is marine biodiversity. CSIR NIO, a premier institute with expertise in ocean sciences, Guyana has an extensive coastline of approximately 500 km and rich marine biodiversity. Partnership with CSIR NIO could significantly support Guyana's goal in marine biodiversity conservation and sustainable coastal development. With that, the proposed roadmap would be CSIR can share with Guyana the best practices being implemented in India for the conservation of biodiversity that would enable Guyana to accelerate the efforts in the Caribbean region and maximize the impact of its ventures. Regarding the establishment of International Center of Biodiversity Conservation in Guyana, CSIR can be an ideal knowledge partner. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to, at this point, hand over to Ms. Pradeepa Bolanat, who will take us through the closing plenary with His Excellency, President of Guyana, Dr. Mohamed Irfan Ali, and with the President of COP30, His Excellency, Ambassador Andre Correa de Lago.
Administrative note. We have been listening very carefully to the keynote speakers, the moderators, and if you can send any comments, if you think we've not captured something as well as it was meant to be. It's not intended to be a document that has every statement made by every speaker. It's intended to have the main messages. So we plan to finalize this document in a week's time. So please, if you could take a read over the course of maybe the next 4 to 5 days and send us feedback by next Thursday, and we would seek to finalize that document and post in final form by the end of next week the summit outcomes document on the GBA website. So I urge you, please give us a bit more of your time next week as you think about the points made and how we can best reflect that as part of the work plan. And we look forward to your support in helping us finalize that document. Additionally, the website, our Facebook page, and our podcast series will remain active. So if you have anything to say to us, any suggestions you would like to make, remember it's the start of our work together. And we have a long way more to go as we continue to address the crisis and build in the solutions that we spoke about over the last 2 days. So that was really all I wanted to say, as I thank you for your time, as I thank the persons who've helped to steer the ship over the course of the last 2 days. And the formal closing ceremony will now begin with brief reflections by the President of the COP30 Presidency Secretariat, just for about 2 or 3 minutes, please. And then we have the closing. Sorry, Mr. President? Ambassador, we are open to your full statements. And then we would have the closing remarks by His Excellency President Ali. President Ali will give you a sense as to what is inside that document in draft form, which is the summit outcomes document. And that will take place just after Ambassador has spoken. Ambassador, over to you for more inspiration.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a great honor to be able to participate in this closing session, Mr. President. It's a real pleasure to have a very constructive conversation today. Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, I'm here because President Lula told me that we needed to come and tell President Ali how much we appreciate working together with this wonderful neighbor of Brazil. And I would like to say that in the preparation of COP30, in fact, it's a process that started in Belém 2.5 years ago in the Belém summit of the Organization of the Treaty of Amazonic Countries. And starting from there, President Lula built a series of ideas that he wants to take to COP30, that he had already committed to invite the world to come to Belém. And in this process, we had the G20, the presidency of the G20, and now recently the presidency of BRICS. In all of them, we tried to build the idea that is absolutely central, which is that we have to do things as soon as possible because we believe in science and we know that we have very few years to do the right things that we need to do. And that is why this meeting here and this alliance has a very important role to play and will play at COP30. We are delighted that the alliance has built upon the Biodiversity Convention, which is the kind of UN meeting that you only have governments working together and deciding. The alliance has this extremely important contribution, which is to bring other actors, to bring other stakeholders that are absolutely essential for implementation. And since COP30, President Lula really wanted to be a COP of implementation, a COP of solutions, a COP that people will understand why do we get together and why we have to work together, strengthen multilateralism, and be sure that we do what is really necessary in the years that we have ahead of us. So we discussed today with the President, and we're going to have at COP30 a very special action agenda. Why? Because the action agenda normally is the way of bringing the actors, like the ones that you are inviting to join the alliance, to bring these actors to discuss how we're going to implement what was decided by our government. And what we decided is to take the GST, the global stock take that we all agreed by consensus in Dubai, and use the GST as a mandate for us to do things. And this is what we intend to do at COP30. And the Biodiversity Alliance Summit is exactly in the same spirit, is bring all together from different sectors and very importantly, the civil society, the indigenous peoples, and other people of the forests together to find solutions for the most pressing issue there is in the world, which is to fight climate change. So we are going to have a special place for this alliance at COP30, and I'm very glad to announce it. Mr. President, so this is one step that will leave its mark. And I want to thank you very much for how I've been treated here in your country, wonderfully meeting amazing people, and going back to Brasilia and continue to work with your country. You count on me all the days from now until COP30 to together make COP30 a success. Thank you very much.
Ambassador, thank you very much for your words of inspiration. Your presence here has been an inspiration in pointing out what really needs to be front of our minds as we think about the biodiversity loss and the crisis that we face and the climate crisis. And I believe the point you have made in your opening remarks this morning, that there are really two sides of the same coin. It's a very compelling statement that connects well to the objective of the Global Biodiversity Alliance. And we also welcome very much the point you made this morning about the interconnectivity across and among the Rio conventions that need urgent attention, and now is the best time to do it as we are back in Brazil since 1992. So thank you very much, and we very much appreciate you taking a day off from what will be a very hectic couple of months in the run-up to COP30. And we look forward to seeing you there at COP30. Thank you very much for your time as well as your words of inspiration. I now hand over to His Excellency the President, President Ali, to deliver closing remarks and to give us a sense as to the summit outcomes. Mr. President.
Please have your seats. Thank you. Our distinguished delegates, organizations, institutions, members of the diplomatic community, I must first of all thank all of you for giving us your time over the last 2 days, and of course tomorrow, in building this alliance and partnership in what would be an incredible journey forward. Some of the participants told me they never knew that they would have had the opportunity to have so many important meetings that were scheduled a year ago here in Guyana over the last 2 days. That is because we were able to bring like-minded institutions and personality together. When, of course, the world is faced with many other distractions, we were able to bring this important subject matter on the agenda. I'm particularly happy today that we have the COP presidency here with us, because his presence is important in the next step of this journey. And the next step of this journey is to move to an actionable framework on every aspect of the Alliance work. The founding members of the Alliance will continue to work virtually and as much together to finalize and crystallize the input document for COP30, and for us to assemble a high-level team to the United Nations, because as you're aware, I did announce the formation of this alliance at the high-level week at UN, after which we hope to find champions around the world in getting us as many signatories by the end of COP30 as possible. But in order to demonstrate our full commitment from Guyana, earlier today we had a meeting between Yale, the government, Yale University that is, the government of Guyana, and other stakeholders, including the European Union. And we have committed to a full assessment and documentation of our biodiversity assets so that we can show from the inception our commitment to transparency and accountability as we move forward. So we have already committed ourselves to this, and we are hoping to be one of the first countries to have a full audit and baseline data. And talking about baseline data, I want to congratulate the Field Museum and all of the other partners, including the villages, the Guyana Protected Area Commission, Conservation International, South Rupununi Conservation Society, the Guyana Environmental Protection Agency, University of Guyana, and Map of Life. Today, I think that sometime today or this evening, they would release some amazing work in just one corridor where they were able to document some of our biodiversity riches. 1.5 million hectares of forests, 7% of Guyana's land surface, 275 kilometers from the Guyana-Brazil border in the south to the headwaters of the Berbice River in the north, 73 to 873 meters above sea level, 3.4 billion year-old surface geology, more than 90% mixed upland forests, more than 900 kilometers of three of Guyana's largest rivers, hundreds of rapids, waterfalls, and river islands, thousands of kilometers of forests, creeks, and streams, 800 million trees large enough, they said, to string at least a hammock on it. I'm sure you can string many hammocks in there. 192 mammal species, 178 amphibian and reptile species, more than 440 bird species, more than 400 fish species, more than 2,000 plant species, and trillions of individual organisms. And this was done in a few months. I want you to put your hands together for this amazing team. And as they were celebrating this accomplishment, we decided that we're going to take the work further and work on the area with the Essequibo headwaters and have a similar exercise completed, but more importantly, to have that interlink with the data collection this will be a national border-to-border data collection on biodiversity that we will be doing with Yale and the European Union supporting that initiative. So we're also hoping that the Center of Excellence with this foundational work will be established in the coming years. We're also hoping that we can have our own museum because we have enough history and enough of an ecosystem to support such a museum, and the development of an intensive park to showcase in one area the richness of our biodiversity. So the Alliance has moved from vision to action through collective leadership, shared knowledge, and inclusive stewardship. We now have a bold yet practical path to halt biodiversity loss and finance a nature-positive future. This summit marked not just a declaration, but a turning point for our planet. We had the official launch of the Global Biodiversity Alliance on July the 23rd, 2025. So we should mark that date in our history diary. We adopted the Georgetown Declaration, endorsed by heads of state, indigenous leaders, NGOs, academia, and private sector actors. We had affirmation of the biodiversity as a global public good, essential to health, resilience, and sustainability. And we have made a commitment to have at least 140 countries and organizations, including NGOs and private sector, sign on to this agreement by the end of COP30. The strategic vision, we're able to unveil the 2030 Action Plan, outlining a shared roadmap organized around 5 strategic pillars: achieving the 30 by 30 biodiversity goal, which is protecting 30% of our land and sea by 2030, mainstreaming biodiversity into national and corporate planning, not only national and corporate development planning. And President Duque, Dr. Kartik, and CI would have their work cut out in expediting our work among the private sector and in different markets. The third aspect is unlocking innovative financing, green bonds, biodiversity credits, and debt swaps. We have had such good coverage of this conference that we already have some suggestions, and I know our dear Senator will be working with us too on finding the right partners. We've already had some initial discussions on the possibility of an investment bank. So these are active discussions ongoing. The fourth pillar is empowering indigenous peoples and local communities through finance, governance, and recognition. And fifth pillar is building a robust monitoring and accountability system. Example, the Gross Biodiversity Power Index. So we are showing from the very inception that we want a transparent system, a system in which there is measurement and evaluation, and a system in which there is accountability. And these are key features of a market-driven approach. We want this to be a market-driven approach. That is why it must be open, transparent, has built-in accountability matrix inside. And those are some of the things we are pursuing. In terms of governance and coordination, Guyana confirmed as the chair of the Alliance. We have committed to a technical secretariat, and CI has expressed the willingness also to not only help, but to help host the work of that secretariat. The Alliance will operate as a voluntary, inclusive, and non-binding platform, encouraging broad participation. In terms of key outcomes and initiative, we have the agreement to operationalize a fully standardized national biodiversity monitoring system in Guyana by 2030, the first of its kind globally. So again, Guyana is taking a bold step in being the first globally to adopt such a system. The development of the National Biodiversity Information System to serve as a digital backbone for conservation, finance, and policy. Coming out of the summit, Guyana has announced the launch of the National Biodiversity Management Monitoring Strategy. Guyana will implement a fully standardized border-to-border biodiversity monitoring to support the effective valuation of Guyana's greatest asset. This groundbreaking effort, catalyzed by our convening this week, all of us convening this week at the inaugural Global Biodiversity Alliance Summit will set a new global benchmark for national-scale biodiversity accountability, building on the foundations of Guyana's successful leadership in carbon finance. The country is moving into the era of biodiversity finance, rooted in transparency, science, and sovereignty. At the heart of this initiative is the National Biodiversity Information System, for which the MOU was signed just yesterday, a robust digital infrastructure that will unify biodiversity data collection, analysis, and decision-making across Guyana. This strategy will be developed and led by an interagency coalition of government, local and indigenous peoples, academic institutions, the NGOs, of course, not only locally, but internationally, building on decades of Guyanese-led conservation. This initiative will enable us to meet and exceed our 30 by 30 targets while embedding biodiversity stewardship in Guyana's development pathway. Working together with our partners in the Alliance, we hope this model, its tools, systems, and lessons will provide a foundation to co-develop and adapt for application in other national contexts. The work begins now. Let this stand as a bold signal of Guyana's unwavering commitment to nature, climate, and our shared future. We also agreed on the establishment of an international biodiversity research consortium anchored in Guyana, the endorsement of a community-driven monitoring and data sovereignty system to empower local stakeholders. As it relates to global and financial commitments, calls for increased climate and biodiversity finance from developed countries, multilateral institutions, but importantly, from the market. Broader stakeholder agreement to link finance to environmental performance matrix. Building on the spirit and ambition of the Georgetown Declaration, we underscore the urgent need for enhanced engagement by developed countries in mobilizing substantial, predictable, and long-term financial resources for the conservation of tropical forests. In this context, we welcome the expansion of jurisdictional approaches to forest financing, including carbon markets, and the planned launch of the Tropical Forests Forever facility at COP30. Carbon markets and the TFFF are complementary parts of a menu of options for forest financing. To this end, we support the expansion of high-integrity markets for jurisdictional approaches, and we also encourage potential investor countries to announce ambitious contribution to the TFFF. Further, we call international organizations, NGOs, and civil society to support the TFFF worldwide. We also encourage tropical forest countries to join the initiative and seize this opportunity to advance sustainable development pathways and protect standing tropical forests, strengthen national ownership with the important engagement of indigenous peoples and local communities, and contribute meaningfully to global biodiversity and climate goals. I think I've covered some of the important areas in this conference. But before I close, again, I want to thank all our participants. I want to thank the local team, Pradeepa, Vanessa, Nick, the entire team. Marcia from my office and her team, President Duge and his team, CI, Kevin, Kartik, President of COP, all of you, all of the organizations here. I want to thank you for your extraordinary support. Without your support, this conference would not have been successful. I want to thank our local diplomats. It's not often that our local diplomats remain for 2 days in a forum like this, but it shows that their capital and what they represent is critically linked to what we are doing. And I want to applaud our local diplomats because they also played a key role here. I want to leave by saying to us all that the first step is always the important step. It's a step of confidence. It's a step that says to us all, we can do it. And I believe with the expertise, the commitment that is within this room, that we can make this happen. One thing for sure, we are not short of talent in this room. We have brought together the best talent around the world to help this moving. So just imagine we have brought together the best talent globally to get this baby walking. We now have to keep that talent in nurturing as we run along to victory. I must also acknowledge Hess Corporation, and I think you can all give them a big round of applause for seeing the necessity of this. And as we were saying, we want everyone to be around the table. We believe that the only way we can win is if there is a space for every voice, every sector. We have to let every sector feel a part of the solution. We cannot define sectors as emitters and non-emitters. That is creating diverging views. Our objective is to bring everyone around the table and to find a comprehensive solution based on science, based on facts, based on market, based on livelihood, and based on a sustainable future. That is what we want to achieve. We don't want to be part of a debate as to what is science and what is facts. That is established. We now have to get the market to accept what is established. And we cannot get the market to accept what is established if we lock the market out of the discourse. So, with these few words, once again, thank you all, and may God bless you. I wish all of you a safe journey back home. Please enjoy your study tour tomorrow. Unfortunately, I'll be on another tour. Important tour, though, I must say. But I look forward to seeing all of you before some of the founding members and the technical team. Definitely before COP. Already we have some meetings scheduled in New York during September. We have some presentations that have already been requested, and we will be working on identifying ambassadors who will take the message to all corners of our world. Thank you very much, and God bless you. Hope they have snack for you guys. You deserve it. And I'm sorry that the room was so warm. I told them to keep it cool for you guys, but it's very warm, I am told. The ambassador of Belize told me that the room is warm, if I can have it a bit cooler.
Just a quick logistical message. Anyone who is going on the tours, could you huddle with us here, please? We have some departure and arrival information. If we can huddle here, Vanessa has some details. Anyone who's going on the tours, could we huddle, please?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We made it.
Congratulations.